Hello, everyone. This is episode 1 of God for Machine podcast, and we've got Matthew Roberts, the author of Initiated. Matthew is a 16-year veteran of the United States Navy, and he has, in his time in the Navy, he had experiences with what I think is commonly referred to as the phenomenon. And we're going to talk about those experiences and kind of the broader implications of the phenomenon, both for the individual and for society. And Matthew, maybe I can hand it over to you and you'll give us a brief introduction. I know you've done a ton of podcasts where you go
Yeah,
into detail on kind of the experiences that you had, and I think we want to go a little beyond those into more deeply exploring kind of the phenomenon and uh, everything that comes with that.
right. Well, first of all, thanks for having me, John. I appreciate it. Episode 1, it's a pretty big deal. Um, so anyway, introduction of me. As you said, I was in the Navy. I was a cryptologist for 16 years. Um, so all of that stuff that I did in the Navy is, classified. I lived in that world for 16 years. I ended up getting stationed on the Theodore Roosevelt for the Gimbal and Go Fast events. That was during a workup cycle that we were having. And after that, I was stationed at the Office of Naval Intelligence. And that's ultimately where I ended my naval career after 16 years. And then I moved to Arizona, and that's where I'm living now.
Awesome. And when you were at the Office of Naval Intelligence, you were at the Pentagon.
No, that's not in the Pentagon. It's the Office of Naval Intelligence is its own entity. It's its own building. It's actually in Suitland, Maryland, right next to the Census Bureau and across the street from NOAA.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Which is where Tim Gallaudet worked, who has kind of
Yeah.
become a pretty prominent voice for disclosure and awareness of the phenomenon. Uh,
hmm
and then I think the Office of Naval Intelligence is it correct that it's the oldest intelligence agency?
That is correct. Yes, it's the oldest American intelligence gathering agency. It was the first. hmm
Interesting. So I
Long
think,
history. Yeah.
yeah, very long history. I think what you kind of uniquely, in my opinion, bring to the table um, in kind of the conversation around the phenomenon is um, you have, I think, deciphered um, a very well defined structure to interaction with the phenomenon, both uh, how that interaction takes place and how it culminates and what it means for us.
hmm Yeah. Well, I mean, it wasn't. I don't know that there was deciphering so much as I, I looked at my own experiences, and then I kind of decided that, well, I'm not the only person that's ever had this happen to them, or had any kind of contact with the phenomenon. So I decided to look at other sources, and some of those sources were recent sources and some of those sources were very old sources, because I knew that if it was happening to me, it's happening to other people, and it had been happening to people across time, so I decided that, well, I'd look for the bells and whistles of this type of contact in antiquity, and that's what I found, that this has been going on for a very long time. Not only that, but it really has a rich cultural history. I found it in world religions, founded in philosophy, ancient philosophy, Greco-Roman philosophy, uh, Indian culture and philosophy. I mean, it's worldwide and it's everywhere, and it always has been.
Yeah, so true. But I think that for so many people who have direct experience with the phenomenon, this structure is not obvious.
Right.
And maybe it wasn't obvious to you at first either, but I can't help but notice that you are a trained intelligence analyst.
Right.
And this, at some point, you must have, that training must have applied as you kind of were trying to figure out what the hell was going on here.
Yeah, I mean, it did. I mean, I definitely used that training. Because what I did was, and this is what I would do at work too, is I would take some source or some credible source, right? And then I would just drill down on that and go down as far as I could with it. Um, and based on, iconography that I saw in my experiences and the language that was used within those experiences, I found that they were just kind of dripping with this religious symbolism, and that was very curious to me. I thought, why is that? You know,
And do
it
you
didn't.
remember the moment when that became clear to you?
Yeah, I mean, right off the bat, it became clear to me. I mean, the first entity that I saw in my room, right, at night, which, and I'm going to talk about this stuff very openly and plainly and kind of cavalierly because it's just the truth. I mean, and I don't, uh, people can think I'm as crazy as they want. I held a top secret security clearance for 16 years, right? I mean, I'm very much sane. Um, but anyway, so the first entity I saw in my room at night presented itself in such a way that it had, kind of like rays of light coming out of its head and like an aura of light behind it, like golden light. And to me, that looked like religious symbolism that I've seen all over the world, of a deity or a saint in Christianity or, or an angel, so it presented itself in that way. And I couldn't help but think that it looked like religious iconography, that
Yeah.
image. Um,
That experience was like in February when you were going through the season of initiation, which, as you describe it, goes from
mhm.
roughly the fall equinox, the autumn equinox, through to the spring equinox.
Yes. Uh-huh. And the reason I came to that conclusion was just because I started looking at cultures around the world, and they all have these types of initiations that would happen, that were part of their cultural religious experience. And uh, I opened my book with um, a famous Greek hymn, the Homeric hymn to the goddess Demeter, because that hymn was central to the Eleusinian mysteries, which was obviously the big mystery school, and it would initiate its subjects into the mysteries of the universe, you know. Um, and it was within that myth that was central to these mysteries that I could see kind of um, the same the same types of symbolism and the same types of iconography I saw in my experiences, right? Like
Yeah.
at one point in the myth it talks about the goddess Demeter, and she throws off her disguise, and her divine light illuminates the entire palace that she's in, like a bolt of lightning, the myth says. And I thought, that sounds familiar, you know?
What was familiar about that?
Just the whole light show, right? The rays of light coming out of the head, and at another point in the myth, she's still disguised, but the myth talks about how her divine light, like, illuminates the entryway in which she's standing, um, as she's introduced to the, Lady of Eleusis, in her disguise. So, yeah, I mean, I saw this, very plainly in, uh, not only these types of myths, but, then later on, I started to study, philosophical works, and I could see myself in those works, right? For instance, Plato's Symposium, right? I saw there's a late dinner guest in this in Symposium, and he ends up describing his teacher Socrates, and the way he describes his teacher kind of fits me, right, and my personality, um, and just kind of the way I've always been, and so things like that. I would pick up on things like that, and it would just kind of reaffirm to me that this has been going on a long time, and that there's an actual framework to this, and that framework has always been known, I think, to certain individuals. Whether those people are in government or not, I don't know. I mean, but certainly to religious scholars that I've read. I mean, I can just see it everywhere. Uh,
Yeah. And you spend a ton of time in your book talking about the symposium.
mhm,
You also spend a good amount of space talking about the Book of Revelations. You
mhm,
discuss a number of pieces of art, Salvator Mundi, the Adoration of the Magi,
yeah,
and there was one more that you talked about, um,
The Last Supper probably.
the Last Supper, definitely,
That
yeah,
was one of them. Yeah,
and I think it was also, yeah, the Last Supper, exactly.
yeah,
So I think to most people looking at these works, you see many different stories. You also talk about the cave allegory.
mhm,
Which if you listen to what Diana Pasulka has to say about the cave allegory, um, I thought about that when you just mentioned like how much do uh, the people that make up power structures throughout history, how much do they know about the phenomenon, right?
right, right.
Um, so maybe you want to get into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I can definitely see that, and in order to be anyone, back in Greco-Roman times, in either Greece or Rome, uh, anyone who was anyone was a graduate of the mysteries, right? Like you weren't anyone unless you had been through that. Um,
And you talk about how during the ancient world, this process of initiation was even perhaps more restricted to just the elites.
yeah, well, I don't think well, I mean, somewhat, right? But there are times when the mysteries in Greece and Rome were open to everybody, including slaves, even. So, I mean, it was restricted in that you had to be kind of sponsored by someone to go through the mysteries. So, in other words, they had to see the potential in you to be able to complete this. Um, and there were philosophers that wrote about it. And some of them I quote in my book. It wasn't something that you were able to speak of freely. Um, the punishment for doing so is death.
Right.
So you really couldn't talk about it, but people did, and they wrote about it, um, including Plato, and including many other people that I cite.
But they write about it in a very coded way.
Yeah, I mean it's always veiled in kind of esoteric speech. Um, but if you're someone who has been through that experience, you can read between the lines and you can absolutely see it, right? Because they'll use some of the same bells and whistles when they write about something. Just like the hymn, right? That was known to like everybody at the time. Uh, they'll use some of those same bells and whistles so that if you've been through it, you know, right? And you'll know what you're reading. Um, but others not so much, right? It wouldn't be as
Yeah.
obvious to them.
So why do that? Why even write about it if all you're doing when you write it is preaching to the choir, right? Or writing stories that only people who have gone through this process already are going to recognize. Why do that?
Right. Well, that's complicated, right? So it's not necessarily that they were writing just about the mysteries, right? They were writing about kind of the intellectual the intellectual end of it, right? And they were writing about things like virtues um that were crucial, right? And a lot of them believed that there was and there's actually one quote. I don't know if I put it in the book, but there was a philosopher, I believe it was a Greek philosopher, who said that there was no greater gift to humanity in the stabilization of civilization than the mysteries, right? Because it stabilized civilization. It solidified it onto a groundwork, a basic groundwork that was based in something real, you know? Um, and so that's why they wrote about it. It was something that it was something that stabilized civilization because it taught you virtue and it taught you lessons and wisdom, all of which are based on reality, right? Which most humans actually don't understand, believe it or not. Um, and it's kind of very abstract and it's very difficult to understand,
Yeah.
especially if you haven't been through it. So that's why they also wrote about it, to kind of instill this in the rest of humanity. Even if you hadn't been through the mysteries, you could take something from philosophy and you could live by it, right? You could it would feel right, and and you could be a better man or woman as a result,
So
right?
many of these stories, they have layers of meaning that
They
can be
do, yeah.
interpreted in many ways, and even by children, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, uh, and the same thing happens today even. I mean, just last night, I was watching a movie from my own childhood, right? That is actually about initiation. A lot of people don't understand it, but it was a Disney movie, and it was called Something Wicked This Way Comes. I don't know if you've ever seen it.
I saw you post that, and I watched the trailer
Yeah,
for it. Yeah.
right. But you know, it came out in 1983, and Disney, when the movie was finished and you know executives were watching it, it frightened them because it was so dark, right? And this is Walt Disney Company, right? This is like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and Cinderella, and then there's this that is like all about death, you know, and it is just filled with death and darkness. And and so they tried to distance themselves from it. They were afraid of this movie.
Yeah.
Uh, And I think as a result of that, it didn't do as well when it came out because they weren't quite sure what to do with it. Is it a kids movie? I don't know. I mean,
I don't know if I
it's
want to
pretty
watch it.
it's pretty dark.
Yeah,
Um uh so there's that. I mean, people still write about it to this day, you know.
yeah,
And you can tell like with this script and this movie, I can tell that it kind of delves into the deeper topics involved, psychological topics involved in initiation, which include things like Jungian psychology. And this movie is full of it. Like the two boys in the movie are one is a shadow of the other, and they actually, as the boy is introducing the movie at the beginning, he's introducing his best friend, who is his shadow. He says that.
interesting.
Um, yeah, and one of them has blonde hair and one of them has dark hair, and so they're opposites, you know? They're
Yeah,
but psychologically speaking, what the movie is presenting is this is the same character, right?
right.
This is the same person. And you just need to realize that this is that person's shadow,
And
right?
so I think we're okay giving away spoilers for a movie that came out in 1983. Um, but at the end of the movie, how does that movie culminate?
The movie culminates in basically, you know, the shadow, Mr. Dark, being defeated, and you know, the day is won, and and they kind of go into this monologue about, you know, you're a better person at the end of this, and that it's kind of these difficult things in life that really show us who we are and what we're made of, you know.
So you go through this profound process, right?
Hmm.
Where these philosophers, authors, artists are writing stories that have layers of meaning from children to adults. And
Hmm.
uh, as you go through this process and as you finish this process, you defeat Mr. Shadow. You come
Hmm.
out of the process, you're still a human being. You're still imperfect, highly imperfect, as all human
Hmm.
beings. And uh, your psyche still requires maintenance,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Well, to live everything that you've learned, everything that you integrated.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, and I think, you know, look, the really complicated thing about this that I find so interesting is that there are, and I was mentioning this in a discussion group the other day about how the phenomenon tends to show up in people's lives at certain touch points, right? In childhood, adolescence, and then later on in adulthood. And at each of those touch points, and I'm going to say this because this is the actual basis in reality, right? That I'm speaking of. But since humans don't understand that, the phenomenon has to show up at these touch points to teach you, right? To show you something, so that you can progress psychologically. And some humans have understood that better than others, and so they had rites of passage, that were not necessarily nice, you know, at these different phases of life, um, to kind of uh, psychologically place you into um, the next area of growth, right? So you know, that movie, Something Wicked This Way Comes, it is kind of a kids movie, right? Even though it is very dark, it's a rite of passage, right? It's that passage from childhood into adolescence, right? Um, and there has to be something that happens there psychologically for you to pass that threshold. Um, And as I said, there at each of these phases, there are enormous shifts in um, your personal psychology. There are enormous shifts in perception and worldview, and shifts in the brain chemically that happen. So, and nobody would argue that.
Yeah.
Right? I think psychologists and child psychologists would say yes, that's true. There are huge shifts at those points in life, um, and so that just so happens to be where the phenomenon shows up. And I think in antiquity, humans realized this, and so they started to do these rites of passage for children, right? And that's something that I speak about in my book. Something that one of my favorite authors on this subject, Dr. Robert L. Moore, who is a Jungian psychoanalyst in Chicago, and wrote many books on these topics. But something that he said was that, in I believe it was Australian Aboriginal, maybe practices. I can't remember if that's exactly what he was talking about, but other cultures have had similar things that when you have a child and they start to become a problem, right? Because they're getting older and yet they're still a baby, right? You're still clinging to your mother, and she wants you to go away, and she needs you to be more independent because this is a small community of people, right? So you need to start carrying your weight. Um,
And I think
and
when you
so
wrote about this, like the men in the village would come disguised, and they would come disguised
yeah,
as like
monsters.
non-human
Yeah,
entities. Yeah, and the mother would be in on the whole thing, even though she would be pretending to
yeah.
try to save the child from the monsters. Right?
Yeah, yeah, she would feign like fighting them off, but in the end, of course, the monsters would take the child, right?
Yeah.
And so they would take these children outside the village, sometimes far outside the village, so that it was not easy for them to get back. And they would be put through the ringer. They would be slapped around. They would be told that they were going to be killed, even. And that may seem inhumane, but at the same time, it's going to force you to grow up really quickly, right? Because you're going to think, I've got to get out of this, and I've got to figure a way out of this. And so you're going to start to then use those mental faculties that would be required of
Yeah.
of doing that, and of being a more responsible adult, right? You're going to start to employ those types of things psychologically.
So
Um,
two things that
yeah.
come to mind here
Hmm.
are one, and the very different ideas. So I want to give both their due. One is these men are dressed as monsters, right? But they're not monsters; they're humans.
Yeah.
And so, for many people going through these established rites of passage, probably most people would not report any paranormal activity associated with these rites of passage. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Hmm.
And
I
then
would say that's true.
the second thing that comes to mind is these kids are getting beaten up. Like, bad things are being done. What we would consider bad things are being done uh,
Hmm.
to these kids, ultimately to their benefit, but they're being violated. And I can't help but think your first interaction with the female entity, you were violated in a way
Yeah.
that is
Hmm.
like maybe the deepest form of violation that there is in society, except perhaps murder.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and that was how I felt, at the time. But I would say that I felt that way, but at the same time, I thought about the symbolism, right? That was employed in that experience, and I thought about. I just kind of used logic and reason to think to myself, because there's all kinds of theories out there about what this is, right? That this is something that feeds off of your bad energy, or it likes to cause chaos, which I would say is true to some extent because you need to be introduced to a little bit of chaos in order to understand that you don't like it, right? Um, but I think that I think as you said, it's ultimately for the greater good because once you start going ticking through the various theories that are out there, um, I started thinking. I'll give you my whole line of thinking as to why some of these theories don't pan out. Like
Yeah, of
the
course.
theory uh that they're less mature than us, right? In some way. I start to think about the technology they had, right? The fact that they can get anywhere they want to be uh as quickly as they want to get there. And in order to have that kind of technology and not have destroyed yourself with it, you must be pretty mature about things. And so what what is this then? Right? If it's not that someone is just messing with me and coming down here just to scare the bejesus out of me in the middle of the night, right? Then what is it? Right? I started to realize that well there's a lot more going on here than I currently understand. But I knew that I had to understand it ultimately. And so that was where I decided that I would kind of reserve judgment um, on these experiences, as frightening and as kind of evil as they seem to be. I understood that any of the simple explanations that are out there could not fit this because it wouldn't work, right? You couldn't have a civilization that existed and had been doing this for thousands of years, right? And without interruption. In other words, there was no chaos in their society that would stop this from happening at any point. Um, so there has to be some stability there. And so I started to think that there's just more
Stability
to
on
this
the part of the
picture.
phenomenon, you mean?
What's that?
Stability on the part of the phenomenon?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, cause
They
we, you,
exist in a state of permanent civilization.
yeah, exactly. Because, over the course of those thousands of years, you can see how we've had civilizations rise and fall and collapse and implode and all kinds of things that have happened. And so it really lent itself to the idea that that wasn't happening on their end, right? So what does that mean? It means some kind of ultra responsibility, and yet these experiences seemed antithetical to that. And so what does that mean, right? And so I realized that there was more to this than just some simple explanation. There was no simple explanation for this, right?
Yeah. And so you've got this phenomenon, and we're trying to understand what it is, but also why. Why is it interacting with us, right? Because it's this advanced uh, set of beings or sets of beings that maybe species is the right word, I don't know, that exist in a state of permanent civilization and
Mhm.
exist in a state of very high attainment, perhaps ultimate attainment. And they are investing quite a bit of time in us humans, it would seem. Uh,
Yeah.
and so there's the aspect of this that is seems to be integrated into the structure of our societies through the ages, through whatever institution is holding the mysteries.
Yeah.
Uh, but also, as you suggest, does not necessarily view any of our governmental structures or any of our power structures as holding legitimacy. And I think you raised that when people talk about why doesn't it just land on the White House lawn?
Right. Yeah. And, you know, The answer to that is also very complex. I mean, first of all, um, in order to land on the White House lawn, what they would be saying is that we give we lend legitimacy to this um system, right, that you have set up. We I mean, because think about the United States and our diplomatic relations, right? We don't have normalized, or we hadn't had normalized diplomatic relations with countries like North Korea because they were just, uh, morally kind of backwards. And so we're not going to meet with them directly and lend any kind of legitimacy to the reign of that regime, right? We're not going to say we endorse Kim Jong Un as your leader, or we recognize him as your leader, even.
Well, we're not going to give overt endorsement, but perhaps we do recognize him as the leader.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, and so uh, there's this other aspect of it that our and I'm going to say this openly and frankly, but our civilization as it currently stands is not based on anything real. And that's why civilizations collapse, because they ultimately don't have this undergirding of what is real about reality that kind of props them up. Um, and civilizations that have attempted that are ones I think that have lasted the longest. Certainly. Greece and Rome, they lasted a couple thousand years. Um, Egypt, in ancient Egypt, their civilization lasted many thousands of years.
Yeah.
And they had their own version of the mysteries that they used. Gnostic Christianity was the same way. It is no longer. Uh, and one of the most difficult things about this and the truth of it is that what you need to understand about what we're living through today is that we have religions today in the world. Most people view religions and they think it's just nonsense, right? There's nothing there. Because we live in a time when religions are dying, right? And civilizations are collapsing as a result. And the reason, not to endorse religion, but what I'm saying is that the religions don't function as they're supposed to. They can't. They are not connecting you with something that is real.
Well, that's the thing. But we inherited our religions from those societies that you just mentioned. I mean, Christian is,
Yeah.
uh, it comes from Judea, but it is, the first Bible was in Greek, I believe, and it was the Roman state religion for,
Uh-huh.
probably close to half of Rome's existence.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so when you say this, and I think about how the phenomenon presents itself today, whereas in yesteryear, they're talking about gods and goddesses and supreme beings. And today we talk about technology and we live in an age of science. And so to me personally, what the phenomenon, much of what the phenomenon has done is it presents this nexus of technology, science, and religion, spirituality. Because, and at least my own journey, kind of paying attention to the phenomenon, started with, oh my God, there are these crabs zipping around the air. That's
Uh-huh.
weird, right? And it takes a little while to wrap. It took me a little while to wrap my head around the fact that there are actually these things. Once I wrapped my head around that, I started saying, okay, what else is real? And then I started looking at experiencers. Uh,
Uh-huh.
and then you get into the consciousness aspect of it, which takes on I think, what what can fairly be called like a pretty spiritual phase. Uh,
Hmm.
so it's almost like today it is bringing together these two worlds of kind of ancient spiritual traditions and our modern scientific process and framework.
Yeah, I think you're right about that, and I think that's what the phenomenon has always done. And the thing about ancient cultures is within a lot of them, science and religion were the same thing, just like you're talking about,
Yeah,
right? Because because there was an aspect to religion that was real, that is real, right? It's not taught that way today. And today, as I said, religions are dying as a result because they cannot connect you with something that is real.
yeah.
But
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 we don't even see it as real. We see it as
yeah,
either stories or anyone who's reporting any kind of reality to religion is viewed as having a mental disorder.
yeah. I well, by some people, I would
Yeah,
argue is correct.
but well, by the mainstream consensus, I would say
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I would agree with that. Um, and that's kind of unfortunate because in antiquity it wasn't always that way. Uh, and a lot of people will point to the fact that well, oh, we've had all these technological breakthroughs as a result of uh, science and its advancements, and since it parted ways with religion. Um, and I would agree with that to some extent. I mean, because I think religion, certainly Christianity, was dying before that happened, before that split happened. And I think that it was becoming too dogmatic and it was slowing things down. And I think so that's why it was kind of ditched and thrown off to the side because it had already been dying for a long time. Um,
that okay. So when would you set the kind of beginning of the that period of death of Christianity?
I would set it probably comfortably within the Reformation and Counter Reformation time period.
Okay, so
So right before the
1500s.
Enlightenment.
Yeah,
Huh? Yeah.
1500s.
Yeah.
And I think that's also Jung talks about, I think, the last 500 years essentially being the age of the Antichrist in kind of this Christian cycle we live in.
Hmm.
Uh, and he talks about the publishing of Faust as kind of being what I think he views that as kind of the inflection point where that age of the Antichrist starts.
Yeah. I mean, I think it. Well, I kind of. So there's this book called "The Religion with No Name," and I would encourage people to read it. But it basically deals with the fact that there were psychedelics that were used um, in the religion with no name, right? That is timeless, that no one ever speaks of. And yet it's the religion that gave birth to all the world's religions, right? And it's the one that has been practiced kind of secretly in private rooms, off to the side, outside of the mainstream religion. But they used psychedelics in a lot of that. Um, and there are actually people who are saints now that died of ergotism, which is from chronic ergot use. Um, and this was prior to the Reformation and Counter Reformation. So part of the Reformation and Counter Reformation was that people within Christianity who were using ergot and people who knew the recipe for it were um, kind of singled out and they were killed by the Catholic Church. Um, and so that put an end to that. It put an end to that practice of the mysteries alongside the mainstream religion,
Yeah,
which ultimately causes the mainstream religion to die
yeah.
because it's not there's nothing there anymore.
and we've lived through kind of in American history and world history under kind of the age of Pax Americana. We've seen um, large efforts to suppress the use of psychedelics there as well, which I think now is actually turning around. And I think the biggest force probably pushing and succeeding in decriminalizing and making more available for clinical treatment psychedelics is the veteran community because it's so effective in resolving a lot of trauma that veterans deal with.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it is becoming something that is much more widely used within psychology because they realize that it works. Um, and I think that in antiquity it was realized that it works. Uh, and I think it can work if you're given the correct framework for things, which is also why if you were entering the mysteries in antiquity, you had to be sponsored by someone because someone had to be there with you through it, kind of holding your hand and walking you through the experience. I did not use any psychedelics, obviously. I was in the Navy working at the Office of Naval Intelligence. I got drug tested all the time. I've never been into drugs ever in my life. So there was none of that. And I didn't, I certainly didn't have any kind of sponsor that was walking me through it. But the experiences themselves spoke to me, and I did my own reading. Uh, there were books that came to me, obviously, that would explain what was happening to me. If I would read them and kind of understand them, which I did. And so I had that, right? I had books,
Yeah.
which a lot of people do have that, but I think today, right? There's such stigma on this stuff that they almost dismiss anything that seems kind of woo or spiritual or
Yeah.
anything like that. But I
Well, okay, I'll say I have used psychedelics, and that's been a big part of my process. But you talk about books also being a part of your process, and Diana Pasulka talks about the book experience in the context of the phenomena, where you have this kind of like um, extraordinary experience, right? And then books or different media will come into your life and give you kind of context and also perhaps give you a path forward. And I know you used a lot of books by William Walker Atkinson and Mabel Collins to kind of guide you through your process of initiation.
Yeah, yeah, and the reason why I did that is because during my experience, those books were a part of the experience, right? They came to me in very kind of scary ways, and it was like, you will read this book, and in the beginning, I resisted that, and it's like, no, really, you will read this book. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? It was really, and it's funny now, but at the time, it certainly wasn't funny. It was terrifying. Uh, but I can look back on that and see that, yeah, the books were very necessary. And a point about Diana Pasulka, I don't know that she would disagree with me on some of these points because she made a post the other day on X that said it was a Catholic theologian that she was quoting, and the quote was something to the effect that the future Christian will be a mystic
Yeah.
or he won't be Christian. Right? And within that simple quote, what you're saying is that if the Catholic Church or if Christianity can't connect you to something real, it's going to die. And 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 people will move on and look for the next thing that will connect you with something real.
Yeah. And I think she's also talked about how her experience studying the phenomenon has brought her to, I think she's considered herself a devout Catholic her whole life. I think she also acknowledges that studying the phenomenon has made her Catholic faith or Christian faith more literal and more real.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that too. I mean, the problem is that you have to have that you have to have that context of what is real in order to understand what your religion is actually telling you and what your faith is telling you. And if you don't have that context on these stories, they're just stories. Um, you might as well just be watching Star Wars. Like nobody thinks that's real either, but
Yeah.
but it is. Uh, I mean, and that's another complexity that I don't know. We could get into that if
Yeah,
if you
totally.
wanted.
Because I
Um,
think a big part of something that's really worth discussing is how um, the way that in ancient literature initiation was embedded into stories of the time.
mhm.
Uh, Initiation, the phenomenon, let's say aspects just around kind of official government disclosure, right? Are seem to all be embedded in our media.
Yeah, yeah, and Uh, as I said, there's a reason for that because people who have been through these experiences and have them end up writing, and they'll write stories. And one of those people was a guy named Joseph Campbell, who basically wrote quite a lot about how yeah, about the similarities between stories in various religions worldwide and how they had these kind of common threads. And he kind of put in there this idea that throughout these stories there's this idea of the hero's journey, right, which is the most famous story ever told. And Hollywood has realized that if you just follow this roadmap of the hero's journey for any given movie or script, that you're going to end up having a really great movie. People will want to see it. um and that comes from ancient storytelling. But the fact that all of those stories are the same and you can kind of pick out this kind of generic roadmap to those stories tells you that there's something there, right? There's some common thread. This is worldwide, right? And we're talking about stories in South America, stories in Europe, stories all over the world that, and these peoples weren't necessarily connected by anything. There were no one knew about America, certainly at some of the
Yeah.
times that these stories were being written. And yet they all have this hero's journey kind of thread in them. And so that was Joseph Campbell's contribution, that he found this common thread. And just as we're talking about with initiation and how I interpret this, and I interpret it as the hero's journey, right? That's ultimately what these stories are all talking about. The um
And you also say that I think that life itself is a hero's journey. It's a series of beginnings and endings.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a story arc to your life, and it's up to you to find the lessons in that, and to find the adventure in that, and to ultimately find the truth in
Yeah.
that.
And I wonder, do you think there's a transcendence, or is there a point of transcendence beyond the hero's journey?
Well, I think that that's kind of what the hero's journey is about. It's about transcending the human experience, right? Becoming more than human. Um, and I think that that's exactly what the mysteries will teach you. That's exactly what religion is supposed to teach you and instill in you. And that's what ultimately these ancient stories are supposed to instill and teach people, right? And so anyway, Joseph Campbell, back to the point I was talking about Star Wars. Joseph Campbell was the reason for Star Wars, basically. I mean, he helped um really uh put uh he helped really just make that movie what it was.
That's so interesting. Did he
Yeah.
work directly with George Lucas?
Yes, absolutely, he did. And there's actually an interview with him at uh what is it? Skywalker
Skywalker Ranch.
Ranch,
Yeah. Not to be
where
confused with
Lucas.
Skinwalker Ranch.
Yeah, right. Right, and so he does this interview with Bill Moyers, right there at,
Oh, is that at
Skywalker Ranch.
Skywalker Ranch? Oh,
Yes,
okay, I've
it
seen
was, yeah, and he talks about his involvement in Star Wars, in that, obviously, because he's at Lucas's ranch when he gives this
yeah,
interview.
that's right, he does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, I
and
mean, that's what Joseph Campbell is the reason Star Wars is what it is,
yeah,
right?
and
And
I
so when
think
he
George Lucas was also, himself a student of mythology.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. All you have to do is watch or read any of his books. He's got a really great book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, the hero's journey. Uh, he wrote dozens and dozens of books. I mean, they're a wealth of knowledge on human mythology, really. And he gets into a lot of that in the interview, and he talks about how he applied those mythologies to and the story of the hero's journey, how he applied those things to Star Wars
Do you
to
think
make it
that
what it
George
was.
Lucas is an initiate?
I don't know. I don't know. That's kind of the crazy thing about this is because sometimes you can read stories and you could say, "Oh wow, that person for sure is an initiate." And then you start to listen to them and it's clear that they aren't, right? But that's why this is so complex um and it has a lot to do with the subconscious. We all are connected to the subconscious. So you might wake up with this story idea in your head one day, right? And you think it's your idea and your story and really it's not.
Yeah, and I
It's
think
a
artists are perhaps especially connected to the unconscious, and talk about the process of creation as more a process of channeling. And even, Homer, uh,
Mhm,
in the Odyssey, he invokes his first line of the Odyssey as an invocation of the muse to speak
mhm.
through him.
Right. Yeah. And but there are other authors that have written stories and you start to look into their background and they describe themselves as a mystic, right? Like Bernard Shaw, for example.
Yeah.
He's a self-described mystic. He would tell people he's a mystic, right? And yet he was this great playwright, and he wrote stories about initiation. And I talk about him in my book as well.
Okay, so what is an initiate and what is initiation?
So the initiation is just an initiation into the truth of what the universe is, what all of this is, um, where it's going, um, and it's just about the nature of reality and knowing that for oneself. Um, you know, uh, science will tell you that you have to listen to some kind of a physicist or uh or some other scientists and they'll tell you what the universe is or they'll try to and science will also poo-poo the idea that you can actually know that the answer to that question for yourself, but that's based on a model of the universe that science holds that says none of this is connected. It's all just coincidence and there's no reason for any of it. And if that model is false, then that theory all falls apart. But if you have a model where the universe is in fact created, which is what people have said for tens of thousands of years, right?
Yeah.
Um, and 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 yet we'll dismiss that for some reason, um, even though people have been saying it for tens of thousands of years. And if that model is correct, you would think that the answer to questions like this would be knowable to an individual, and they in fact are. And people have known that for thousands of years. There's no mystery here. You can know if you want to know badly enough. But the initiation is the process by which you become acquainted with some of these ideas, right? And what reality is.
And so at what point along the process of initiation for you, um, did a knowing occur?
At the end. Yeah, it was at the end. There was a lot that was happening to me, and I didn't understand any of it, right? And things would happen and I would say, "Okay, put a pin in that. I'm reserving judgment. I don't know what that is." Right? I could interpret it one way or another. I could have. I could have said this is evil, this is biblically satanic. It's awful, it's whatever. I could
Why
have
would you
put a
think that?
label on it, but
Why why would you think that it was satanic?
well, because people put things in buckets of good and bad, right? They put things in these buckets and they say, "Well, I want good and I'll take none of the bad," right? Without realizing that the bad is what you need, right? That's where growth happens. That's
Okay,
where
let's go there. Yeah, talk about that.
right. So if you lived in Candyland, let's say, right, and everything was just perfect, and everyone was just perfect, um, you would be just perfect and you would never grow or develop. Um, but if you have some adversity, if there's some adversity there, then there's thought that needs to happen. There's reason, there's logic that needs to come into play. Um, and so you will grow emotionally, you'll grow spiritually from that adversity, and it will teach you things about yourself and about the people around you and about the world around you. And without that, you could not develop. Um, so you have to take the bad with the good, right? And so I don't what I learned from this ultimately is that I don't put things in buckets of good and bad, right? In fact, if I come across something and I think, oh, I really don't want to do that, or I really don't want to go there, I immediately I know that's where I have to go, right? That's what I have to
Yeah.
do.
So when we talk about putting things in buckets of good and bad, on the one hand, you're talking about the course of your experience of initiation, right?
Hmm.
Bad things happen to you, and
Right.
that was um, acted as a catalyst, right? Catalyst for growth.
Hmm.
But then we're also talking about um, the knowing that you received at the end of initiation, and you're saying I could, if I was putting labels on things, I could describe part of that as bad.
Yes, absolutely. Hmm.
So maybe can we talk about both the good and the bad of it, and the knowing holistically?
Yeah. So so bad things that happened, right? The whole thing usually starts off, and I don't know how deep I can get really deep in the weeds on
Yeah,
this.
let's fucking go.
Okay.
What else are we doing?
So and for a lot of experiencers, there's a
Hang on,
sexual
wait. Okay, can we just take a quick bathroom break and then
Yeah, sure.
we'll dive in. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, just give me. Okay, we just finished our break, and now we're gonna dive into the deep end.
All right. So as I was saying, the experience, this experience usually starts off for experiencers with some kind of a sexual experience, right? Um, and you could take that and put that in the bad bucket because it's not something you asked for, right? Um, but something that I learned in the end was that, and I thought this at the time, I thought, this can't be just what it seems on face value, right? It can't be just um, a sexual experience, some kind of forced sexual experience, right? It can't be just that. Um, and it wasn't, as I came to understand it. Um, and this gets very complicated in terms of the nature of reality, right? And this just goes to show you how little we understand about the actual nature of reality. But
Yeah,
the way I began to understand that experience was that, um, how can I put this? So it's generation, right? One of the books I read initially when I started this journey that kind of fell in my lap in a very terrifying way was a book called The Kabbalion by the Three Initiates, right? And it talks about the seven principles that, in fact, are kind of woven into the nature of reality. This book was written like 120 years ago by William Walker Atkinson, who you mentioned
yeah,
earlier.
and
Um,
two other authors, and they
yeah,
publish under the in the Kabbalion. They call themselves the Three Initiates.
yes, yeah,
So they're also using the term initiate that you're using.
yes, absolutely. Not only that, but Dr. Robert Moore, who I mentioned earlier, it wasn't even until the end that I understood the totality of what I had been through as an initiation, right?
Yeah,
And I realized that in reading his book called The Archetype of Initiation, right? Um, but anyway,
and he himself talks about initiation. Talks a lot about, I think, what he calls the liminal aspects of initiation. So he's
yeah,
talking about it as kind of a paranormal. Uh,
hmm yeah, absolutely. And he describes it uh, to a T in that book. He talks about a time of confusion and kind of discombobulation and chaos, and to outsiders looking at you, it may seem that you've lost your mind, even, um, but you haven't, right? Um, and so, anyway, within the Kabbalion, they talk about these seven principles that are kind of woven into the nature of reality. And one of them is the principle of gender, which is the major theme of the universe, which is creation, right? When they refer to gender, they don't mean a sexual gender, they mean creation, right? But that is creation at its core, right? Being one of the main tenets of the universe at our level, on the physical level, the way we understand that act is on our physical plane. The way we understand that is sex, right? The physical act of creation, right? The creation of life. And so within this experience, it was almost like they were saying to me, this is what you understand of creation and generation on your level, physical sex. But we are going to introduce you to creation on another plane of existence, which is the mental plane, right? And we're going to show you that. Um, and I know that sounds a little strange, but in terms of, let's say, Jungian psychology, right? Jung, he puts people into categories of introversion and extroversion, meaning that you can either relate to your subconscious as an introvert, meaning that you take those archetypes or these lines of psychological development and you develop them within yourself mentally, or as an extrovert, you project those onto the world out there, right? And so what they're doing here is they're saying, okay, as an extrovert, which is what you are, this is how you understand the act of creation. But we're going to show you the act of creation on a higher level, the mental plane, right? And you can see kind of this divergence between introversion and extroversion on within human beings. If you just look at the world around you, you can see it, right? We have two political parties in this country that are opposed to one another. And
Yeah.
people are kind of at odds to really understand what that is. But you have to understand that that is introversion and extroversion. That is the endless struggle between those two.
Right. And even in democratic nations where you have, more than two parties, you still can roughly divide those parties into left and right.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, and that is just nothing more than um that dichotomy at play, the introversion versus extroversion. And so when you look at these two things, a lot of people, when they think of introversion and extroversion, they think of these nonsensical kind of um, ideas that have come out uh, fairly recently about what those things are, but they relate to the subconscious and how you as an individual relate to the subconscious. You either embody it or you project it. Um, and so these aren't just personality traits, right? And this is what I'm trying to get across to
It's
people.
the relation of the conscious to the subconscious.
Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. The way you consciously relate to your subconscious, right? Um, and so these aren't two personality traits. Like people say, oh, you can be you're an introvert or you're an extrovert, right? Like as though it's some kind of personality trait. But these are two different planes of existence, in fact, right? And that's what people aren't understanding. It's an evolutionary uh uh diverted track in either direction. And you need to think of it in evolutionary terms in order to really understand what's happening in society today. Um, and then you'll see it quite plainly, right? It'll be pretty obvious.
So can you describe it in those evolutionary terms?
Yeah. So if you're introverted, right, you're becoming closer. You're getting closer to the subconscious, right? And this union with the subconscious that Jung talks about is what we would call awakening or knowing, right? And that's the goal of initiation, right? To get you to consciously connect with the subconscious mind, right? Which is universal. And the way Dr. Robert Moore describes it is that the universal mind, the subconscious, is something that most people are barely aware of, right? We kind of get our instinct from that. We have this gut feeling of this or that. right? Something is telling us to act a certain way or to do a certain thing. And and the way that you deal with that pressure is you either internalize it and you kind of work through it and integrate it as an introvert, or you project it on someone else. And so if you're projecting that, right, what happens is this is a very destructive kind of force from within. It seeks to destroy that which doesn't resemble itself, because the subconscious is fully developed, right? It is these 4 lines of psychological development that are fully developed, um, and you will make yourself look like that. Robert Moore describes it as like hitting a bridge abutment. You're going to take its shape because it is fully developed and much stronger. Um, and so you kind of work through your life with the goal of kind of getting closer to that.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think he talks about kind of shadow elements of the archetype as
mhm.
and two manifestations of the shadow psyche are either seeking to dominate the unconscious or submitting to the unconscious. And what you're really trying to find is balance, generative balance in
Yeah.
all. And so in everywhere you find the principle of gender, what you're looking for is balance.
hmm Yeah. And that balance is what generativity is, right? What creation is. Um, it's a balance between the physical and the mental. Um, in other words, if you're human, you can exist in both planes, right? And one of my favorite kind of pieces of art that depicts this is Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, right? Where he's there. There's a man, and he's in 2 different positions. He's touching the edges of a square, which kind of represents the mundane, profane physical world, or he's in a different position and he's touching the circle, which is never ending, right? It's the divine. Um, and so it's showing how, as a human, you can kind of live in both worlds, right? But that um, people who are one or the other, obviously, he depicts them differently in terms of human form. So what I find most interesting about this work of art is that when the man is touching the square, his center is his belly button, right? Because the man of the physical world and of the physical has to be fed, right? But the man who's touching the circle, the divine, his center is his genitalia, which is all about generation and creation.
Okay,
And
so
so he can create,
the center of
right?
the man touching the square.
The center of the man touching the square is his belly button.
Okay, okay,
That's his center,
yeah.
right?
And
Artistically
being fed,
depicted.
you mean like all the material, uh, all kind of our material needs, wants, whatever,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
hmm
you would put
The
money.
man of physicality, the extrovert, right? His center is his belly button because he has to be fed,
Yeah,
right? He's not capable of creation, co-creating with the creator of the universe. But then the guy who's touching the circle, his center is his genitalia, which is um obviously he meaning he can create,
yeah,
right? That is his center.
yeah.
Creation is his center.
And then there's also a triangle in the Vitruvian man, which is the man himself. Is that right?
Uh I don't know that I've seen I don't know that I've seen any kind of interpretation of what there's multiple interpretations of the triangle. mind, body, soul idea, kind of thing. And those three things coming together, in this sacred marriage, which is the union of the conscious and the unconscious, when those two things come together. Um, and so that's kind of what a triangle would represent.
Yeah.
Um,
And
the
also those would be the three shapes of the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah. hmm Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is, the kind of the undergirding of alchemy, right? And the Kabbalion talks about alchemy, and it says that it's not about changing, base metals into gold. It's about changing your mental state from one state to another. And that too is an act of creation in and of itself, uh, within the confines of the reality, the nature of reality,
Yeah.
on the mental plane. Most people who are purely physical, right? They exist only on the physical plane. They do little to rein in the mind and make it mature and 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 to think, right? They live their lives just from one emotion to the next, right? Which is kind of what Something Wicked This Way Comes is about, right? Because if you watch the movie, the kid who's the shadow is always the one getting the other kid in trouble, right? He's leading him around, and he's the one who takes the tickets from Mr. Dark. He's the one who uh you know hides under pulls the other boy and says, let's hide until nightfall, and then we'll explore this um this circus, and so he's the one. And that's just what that's saying, is that, like, if you exist in the physical like that, and only in the physical, you're always going to be led by the shadow, right? You're always going to be led by this darker aspect of yourself.
And uh and then would you say likewise if you're only in the spiritual, you were similarly out of balance?
I don't know about that, because obviously I don't exist only in the spiritual, so I don't
Yeah.
have perspective on that. But
You feed yourself every day.
right. Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know that that would be the opposite would be true necessary. I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question. If that's even possible, right? I mean, we don't even know if that's possible. Um
Yeah.
Because obviously with the phenomenon, there is a physical aspect to it, right? There are physical beings and physical craft that are picked up on radar and on sensors. So they are there, and they can be measured. But um and yet they know so much more about the mental plane of existence than we do, right?
Yeah.
And so
And the physical plane than we do.
yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Because they've been there and done that, right? They've surpassed that. And so they can look at us just at a glance and kind of see very clearly where we are psychologically. Um, and we're not in a good place right now, certainly.
Yeah. And so maybe we can talk about that a little bit. I think you compared the phenomenon dealing with humans as kind of the United States dealing with North Korea, which, until several years ago, there hadn't been a direct meeting between North Korea's leader and the president of the United States or any other, I think, Western head of state um, or head of government. And which is not, are you hearing that feedback on the mic?
No.
No? Okay. um, which is not to say necessarily that it's not dealing with uh, human governments. Um, Sorry, I'm getting like buzzing on my, but
Buzzing? Do you want me to wait a minute. There's echo cancellation that's not turned on my end. Is
oh
that
yeah, turn that on. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't do it while it's recording though.
Uh,
It says
um,
can't be changed while recording.
oh, got it. Okay, let's.
You
Well,
want
it's
to
gone
stop it
now.
real quick?
No, it's gone now. So I think we're
Oh,
okay.
okay.
Yeah. But if it comes back again, yeah, we'll just stop recording and then resume. But okay, you describe a being in your, I think, first condo when you were in the Navy and you had a lot of roommates, and you compare that being to, or you say that being looked identical to beings in drawings of an alleged landing at Holloman Air Force Base,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
which
Yeah,
to
and
me, yeah, which to
yeah,
me
that
is like, sorry, yeah, go for it.
oh yeah. Well, I was just gonna say that, when I started looking at things and I was looking at modern kind of sources, I heard about this incident. And so I started looking at that. And then when I came across these drawings, I was like, oh my gosh, that looks a lot like the thing I saw in the condo. And at the time that happened, I thought I was having just a nightmare, right? I thought it was just a dream until much later on in life. I even ignored the fact, and I point this out in the book, even though that experience happened, and then I had a downstairs neighbor that confirmed it happened, right? I still dismissed the experience, right? The next day, I go down to my car, and because I talk about how I had fallen on the floor in this dream as this thing was chasing
Yeah,
me,
you got
and
wrecked. Yeah,
yeah, and I kind of fell backwards onto my back, and it knocked the wind out of me, and I was like, like, and and that was part of the experience, and
and you had physical injuries.
yeah, I had like rug burn on my knees that I felt when I took a shower the next morning, which was weird. I was like, I don't know, maybe I crawled into bed and I don't remember doing that because I had fallen asleep in a chair in the living room, and yet I woke up fully clothed in my bed. And so I was like, oh God, I must be getting sick or something. And then I took the shower and I felt the rug burn on my knees, and I was like, that's strange. And then I go down to get my in my Jeep that morning, and my downstairs neighbor runs out of his house, is livid, right? He's so pissed. He's like, your kids were making noise all night long, and he's like, at one point it sounded like they threw a goddamn bowling ball down the stairs. And I was like, whoa, buddy. I don't know. I don't know who you're hearing. I don't have any kids. And I was home alone last night. And it kind of scared me. And I think it scared him a little bit, that I was like, wait, no, none of that is real. What are you talking about? And so, I dismissed it even then. I just thought he was a crazy guy downstairs. Um,
Yeah,
and yet this happened, right?
yeah,
So, so it's really up to us as to whether or not are we going to look into that strange thing that happens to us, or are we just going to dismiss it and move on, right? Um,
yeah.
and that's
The
something that Dr. Robert Moore says about initiation. He's like, you're sitting there and all of a sudden this rabbit runs past you with a pocket watch, and it becomes it's incumbent upon you as to whether or not you're going to figure this out or not, right? Are you going to get to the bottom of this or not? And that's the question. And most people uh don't.
yeah,
They don't go there.
why not?
I don't know. I think it has to do with their proximity psychologically to the subconscious, right? Are you going to take this seriously or not? Um, and I think that the more seriously you take it, it's because you've developed yourself in such a way that you're closer to the subconscious. So there's more of a pull. You feel more of a pull there in that direction. Uh, if that makes any sense.
Makes a lot of sense. I think the process is also really fucking hard.
It is. Yeah. I'm not going to lie. This is the most, I've been through boot camp. I've been in the military, been in bad situations. And this was by far the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life, ever.
There were
I'm not,
times during it that you felt like you were going to die.
yeah. Yeah. I thought for sure I was going to die. And I think I did have a near death experience in the beginning of this.
Yeah.
I ended up in the ICU for a while. So like a lot of people, for a lot of people, this kind of thing, um, they might take it very flippantly, but this is very serious stuff. It's serious, deadly serious stuff.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
and I want to get into this. And I think this is also, you've talked about um, this process of initiation kind of happening pretty frequently under the circumstances of addiction treatment. Uh,
hmm
and I
yeah.
think one reason that is that this process is very, very difficult. And I think for many people, the only reason to go through this process, or the only reason you're able to go through this process, is because, and this i- in cases of alcoholism and drug addiction, in many cases, death is the only alternative.
Yes, it's true. That's very true. And I would say further, that, within addiction treatment, it's important that you, are no longer lying to yourself. You can never lie to yourself again if you're an addict,
Yeah,
right? And so you have to then start to go inside, right? You have to introvert and integrate and say, and you have to admit to yourself, I am the problem, and when you start doing that and you start to realize that you are the problem, I think it's a very natural bridge to then say, well, if that's real and that is reality and I am the problem, what else is real? And then it sends you on this whole thing,
yeah,
right? It sends you down the rabbit hole, so to speak, because that's what the rabbit hole is about. That's what the story is about. It's about initiation.
yeah,
Alice's Adventures in Wonderland is about
yeah. And,
initiation.
and I have some experience with this. And, just when you say you have to take ownership, you have to take responsibility, I also think that it's hard to understand the scale of ownership and responsibility that is demanded. I can tell you, well, I'll tell you a couple of, like in Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, number one, Carl Jung is quoted in that book, and his prescription for alcoholics is, he says the only thing that can save an alcoholic is a vital spiritual experience, right? And that's why the 12 steps are just kind of a classically structured protocol for spiritual awakening.
Mhm,
And as you're going through those 12 steps, one of those processes is one, the fourth step is listing out your resentments. And then the ninth step is making amends to those people. And I think most people know about amends being a part of the process. But in the examples that it's giving of people that you are making amends to, or people that are described as worthy of amends in the book, is it talks about Mr. something. It's like Mr. Brown or Mr. White or something. So I'm probably getting the name wrong. But importantly, it talks about him. This is whoever this person's boss is. It's his boss, And what's the source of the resentment? Well, this guy like screwed you over for promotion and is like flirting with your wife, which in 1930s parlance, I think is this guy is like screwing you over at work and having an affair with your wife. And yet the expectation is that you make an amends to this man because you have a resentment toward him.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think that that's a really that's another reason why a lot of people never finish this process, because there are things that they will come across in that they will be forced to confront within initiation, that will be an extremely difficult pill to swallow, right? Things like that, where um you are the owner of your own emotions. Your emotions don't originate with anyone else other than you.
Right.
And no one else is responsible for that. Only you are, right? And so, but in terms of victimhood, right? That we need to be a victim, right? This person wronged me, and they made me feel this way, and that's nonsense. You made you feel this way.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's your experience. Not only is it showing you generation, it's
mhm,
also putting you in a position where you can reasonably consider yourself a victim.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and so that's part of the ambiguity of it, right? It's like, which are you gonna choose? You have door A and door B. You can go through either one. It doesn't make any difference to us one way or the other, you know? And it's like you choose. Um, and that's one of the things about initiation, is that if I feel like if you had a sponsor, right, who is sitting next to you, they could kind of have a platonic back and forth with you and have you arrive at the correct decision yourself, right? They
Right.
Through logic and reason, he could ask you questions and get the right answer out of you, and then you would be on the right path. But if you don't have somebody to bounce your ideas off of, you may just go through the wrong door, and you never get there.
Okay,
And and
that's
better
great.
luck next life, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. I want to explore that at the level of the individual, but I want to back out a second because that reminds me of where we started with Holloman Air Force Base. And so there, I think where things get most confusing in kind of, and now I'll just say like the UFO subject, right, is where there's rumors of things that happen that have to do with the government, right, and interaction with the government. And so Holloman Air Force Base, very famous in UFO lore, where allegedly there was a landing of a craft at Holloman Air Force Base and a meeting that took place with President Eisenhower. And supposedly this took place during one of his president. I forget what year it took place, but during his administration.
Mhm,
And so I'm wondering so we are, we're not getting our White House landing. And there are lots of stories like Hamish Shed who was the head of the Israel Space Command, did a very famous interview that was covered by, NBC. NBC News has an article about it that you can Google online, where he talks about, you know, governments of the world having an established ongoing relationship with the phenomenon. And uh, by his description, the secrecy is at the behest of the phenomenon, saying that humanity at large is not ready for disclosure. And so uh, we see kind of the mystery schools, and uh, we see patterns of secrecy throughout the ages, where information around the phenomenon, whether it's initiation, whether it's technology, is concerned.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what to say to that. I mean, so I would consider myself in the camp that is pro disclosure. The government doesn't need to tell you what this is, though. They just need to tell you, okay, there's something there,
Yeah,
right? And maybe share images, videos that they've got, um, just like with the gimbal and go fast footage, of these types of incidents that happen. And they don't need to say anything other than that.
right.
I mean, I just be honest and say, there's this thing, right? And it's there, and we don't know what it is,
And
right?
they,
And
I mean, they have done that.
yeah,
The
yeah,
government has done that.
to some extent. I mean, Barack Obama has said that, that there are things in the skies that they don't know what they are.
Yeah.
Um,
There was a
and
report well, they released the videos officially. They released Tic
yeah,
Tac, Gimbal, and Go Fast officially. They
right,
published a report that said these fall in the category of we don't know what it is, right?
right. Hmm.
Um, and so there's I think I heard recently like someone described I think it was Jason Giorgiani, who's a controversial figure, and I think you've got your opinions about him. Um, had he described a 5-stage soft disclosure process that's been taking place
Hmm.
or was taking place, which was like limited data regarding the craft, which could be you know uh, the videos that were published. And then Lou Elizondo coming out and talking about the 5 observables, right? And then he talks about structures throughout the solar system, which there's kind of the structures that have been seen on Mars, which I think there's like a pyramid, there's a face, and frequently those. You know what? Let's stop the recording for a second because I think I'm still getting the feedback. I want to turn on
Okay.
the echo stuff. Okay. Um, so I guess my question is, um, how much of that how much of that do you think is real? How do you think about that? Do you think about the phenomenon as it relates to governments, as it relates to like its macro relationship with civilization, with human civilization?
Hmm. So I maybe view this a little bit differently than most people do. I see the phenomenon as being concerned with individuals at an individual level because that's the only level on which this kind of change can be affected. Um, and so I view those individuals as the people who then in turn affect civilization, if that makes any sense. Like people like Plato who gave us, most of Western civilization stems from a lot of his ideas,
Yeah,
right? And so even Christianity, I would argue, has its roots within Platonic thought. Um, so that's the way I see it. I don't see it the other way around necessarily. I don't see that governments necessarily influence the actions of the phenomenon. I think the phenomenon reacts to individuals, and those individuals then in turn influence civilization through
definitely.
art or philosophy or um, theology, um, poetry, all of the humanities, basically. Um, and a lot of people want to dismiss the humanities, but something that I always tell people is that you want to dismiss the humanities, you want to dismiss Plato and philosophy and all of that and not really pay much attention to it because you think science is the bee's knees, right? Well, guess what? It's not because Plato had his best student in Aristotle. Aristotle had his best student in Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great conquered most of the known world within his lifetime in antiquity, right? So this is very powerful stuff. Tell me the last time a physicist conquered most of the known world within their lifetime. It's never happened, and it never
Well,
will.
okay, I'll play your game.
Yeah.
So philosophers like Plato and Aristotle in their time were also scientists, the scientists of their time,
Yes, they were.
right? They were mathematicians.
Hmm.
They observed. They went through very similar to the scientific method. They observed the natural world, uh,
Hmm.
and you know postulated hypotheses. Uh, and I think today many scientists that introduce um, paradigm shaping discoveries, like if you dig into those, a lot of those discoveries have a mystical foundation or
Yes, they do.
kind of interaction with the phenomenon at its
Hmm.
core. There's a story about Thomas Townsend Brown encountering an orange orb on Catalina Island. And I think he said something like, everything I know about science came from my interaction with this orb.
Hmm. Yeah, and I would totally agree with that. But have those people conquered most of the known world? I would
Right.
argue not.
Right.
And but the thing is, so
But do we
uh,
want them to conquer the known world? I mean, maybe Einstein did, you know?
well, yeah, I mean, I would say that their ideas were uh greatly influential.
Sorry.
That's right. I would say that their ideas were certainly influential. And I don't know, it remains to be seen whether they'll influence as much as Plato's ideas do. But you talk about how, yes, some of these people, if you look at their backgrounds, they have this background which suggests initiation or some awareness of it, at least within their background, right?
Yeah.
And I would say that that's probably correct. But the thing that you have to understand about Plato is not only was he a scientist, but he was also uh, into the philosophy as well,
Yes. And
right?
I would agree with that. And I think that the scientists who make these kinds of breakthroughs, if you look into them, I think they are also in their own right philosophers or students of the humanities.
They
Uh,
are, but you wouldn't know it
right,
because
right,
they won't ever say it, right?
right.
Like Einstein, for instance, uh, it wasn't until he was about to die that he wrote a book called "The World as I See It." That was his last book, and that was where he finally starts to get into some of these ideas of what we're talking about, theology and religion and creationism and things like that. But within his lifetime, he would never go there,
That's
right?
very interesting.
Which
Yeah,
is why that, which is why he wrote that just before he died, because he knew that would be his last thing.
yeah,
Um, because he knew that anything, if he had written that early in his career, anything he had to say after that would be dismissed,
right, right.
right? If he's talking about God and Eastern philosophy along with all of this science, people just be, oh, you're a nut job, right?
Yeah,
I'm not going to listen to anything you're talking about. And so he certainly realized that. Um, and so it was this different time when Plato was around, and he kind of was a trailblazer of his time, and he brought both of those things together, right? And so that's what we need to have again, as someone who can marry those two things, those two ideas of science and spirituality,
Yeah.
to arrive at a greater truth.
Yeah.
Um, and 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 the thing about that is that what I continually like to reinforce about this is that the spirituality aspect of this is not about belief, right? So if you believe, I don't know, it's worthless. You have to know,
Right.
right? Because then if you know, it's kind of like having eyesight, right? We don't need to debate that anymore. You can just get up and look out your window and you can see the truth of something. Right. Right. And so the same thing with this is that if you know the basis of what reality is, if you understand the nature of reality for yourself, because you've experienced it, it's an experiential thing. If you've experienced it yourself, you don't need some scientist to describe that to you or some priest to preach it to you. You can see it for yourself, right?
So, and I guess at the beginning of your book, you talk about I think you're in DC and you're looking at, you know, some I forget which monument. And you talk about there are two destinies for Western civilization, right? And
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
imagine a future tour guide saying either this is where it ended, right? This is where Western civilization collapsed under its own corruption,
Mhm.
or this is where it began, which is that state of permanent civilization that you talk about.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, and I think that could be said of any civilization that has ever
Yeah,
existed, right? You
yeah,
you could it could have gone either way, right? At any point in our human history. Um, and it's always up to us which direction that's going to take. Is it are we are we going to just collapse or are we going to move forward perhaps and become something more permanent and and move on,
yeah.
you know?
And I think you've described every other or all the ancient civilizations as being in better health than we are because they um, better incorporated these principles uh, into the structure of their society. And
Mhm.
so um, I think in your book, you remain an optimist overall. And I'm wondering what you think we need to do to not collapse and to um, transcend. Is that a fair way to say?
Right. I don't know because so either if you read the book carefully, in that particular section, I say either way, you look at it, either this is where it ended or this is where it began. I- in both situations, I talk about DC as being an ancient ruin, right? In other words,
That's right.
it didn't survive, right? Because either way, it won't survive.
Okay, that actually wasn't clear to me because I thought that future tour guide could be, you know,
Right.
taking you through a tour of the Capitol the way you can take a tour today.
Yeah. And well, so yeah, I mean, that's what I'm saying is that, you go through these ruins, and you have a tour guide and they always talk about how, oh, civilization, it died out and it ended. Um, but and then I say I could see a different scenario here and saying this is where it all started. But
Yeah,
ultimately, either way, we're standing on a ruin.
and so
Uh,
why is that?
because our current system uh, is not conducive to permanence. Um, it just is not. Uh, and so not only our current system, but our current um, kind of consensus reality is not conducive to permanence. Because as I said, uh, in order to bring about this permanence, you have to be rooted in something that is real. So you have to be introverted, right? Because the extrovert will always destroy. The extrovert destroys civilization and the introvert builds it,
Yeah.
right? And so if you have any portion of your civilization that is extroverted, that will always be the source of your destruction. It's built into the cake. It's baked in already.
Yeah.
Um, unless you get rid of that. The only way to do that is through uh education, through um I would say through intolerance, right? In that because you understand what introversion and extroversion are, you will no longer tolerate the extrovert.
Right.
That will not be allowed, you know? Um, and certainly other ancient civilizations, as I talk about in my book, were familiar with that concept, right? Which is why you would have these rites of passage for children, so
Yeah.
that you didn't end up with a 30-year-old man child um, destroyer, which would be an incredibly uh, disruptive force within a village, right? You don't want to have that.
Yeah.
And so you had these rites of passage where you say to a child that now you're an adult and we will tolerate nothing less, right? And if you insist, then there's going to be a hunting accident, you know, uh, plain and simple. And so if you recognize what these things are, what these differences are, and you can teach to that, I think that you're light years ahead of where we are now. Um, but I don't see it. I'm not nearly as optimistic. I certainly don't see this happening in my lifetime,
Right. Well,
or even in the lifetime of people who are just being born today.
toward the
I'm
end of
not.
your book, you do say that, in the same breath that you're saying you would gamble on humanity prevailing, you
Yeah.
are saying that we have many decades of, and I'll quote you, "very harsh realities and hard lessons headed our way."
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Um, I don't think that the United States will survive in its current form, even through just this administration. We're going to come out of this at the other end of that looking completely different. What that looks like, I don't know. What will happen, I don't know. But I know it's going to be different than what I grew up in for sure. Uh, and it's going to be totally alien to me. Um,
So then, okay, if that's the case, then why would you say, because whether humanity becomes immortal or not, you're saying that Western civilization will collapse in its current form,
mhm,
right?
yeah.
And so in in that same understanding, um, with the collapse of every other civilization preceding us, we could say that the achievements of those society have also contributed to whatever our ultimate destiny is.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that there's lessons to be learned, obviously. And we can learn those lessons, but you can only learn those lessons if you understand the psychology,
Yeah.
right? Which is continually lost on us. We don't understand that. Um, and we continually do not grasp the concept of introversion and extroversion and what those things are.
Yeah.
right? Jung was very clear about this. And I think many Jungian analysts since him have been clear of this.
Yeah.
Certainly Dr. Robert Moore was. Uh, Even though he may not have expressly said so, he certainly hints at it. I mean, he also has countless lectures that are online that you can listen to, in addition to his numerous books. I mean,
I've
he's
listened to a lot of his online lectures, and I
yeah,
I read, I know he's got, a book for each of his 4 archetypes, but I read the one that talks about all of them in a single book, which is like,
yeah,
king, warrior, lover, magician,
mhm,
not in that order, but
right, and I the thing I think that people a lot of what Dr. Robert Moore did was he made Jung kind of much more understood by the general public.
yeah,
Because I think his ideas were very abstract, and I think Moore kind of nailed them down more precisely, and also introduced the idea that archetypes, what an archetype is, right? And
yeah,
he says it's nothing more than a line of psychological development along which you can develop yourself,
yeah,
right? And that in the subconscious mind, those lines are fully developed. And so you just need to make yourself resemble that.
yeah, and you talk about the pyramid with those 4 and I would say, Robert Moore was also a much more simplified presentation of Jung.
Yeah. Yeah. I think definitely so. But I think that can be true of anybody that first discovers something, right?
Yeah,
Like Jung. Not necessarily that he first discovered it, but he kind of rediscovered it and kind of had to paste it together, and so it's kind of it becomes this huge monstrosity that you're trying to explain to people, and it's difficult to do.
yeah,
And so somebody else with a different perspective comes along and they say, well, this is a better starting point to start from than maybe where you did, because you were trying to do too much, maybe, or it wasn't simplified enough. Like it confused people, and so um, someone can kind of boil it down and make it more understandable to the
yeah.
general public.
So
Yeah,
maybe let's talk about and let's maybe dive deep into what is introversion and extroversion, because we use those words in our parlance today, but I don't
yeah.
think it's used in the way that you're talking about.
Right. No, I mean Jung coined those terms, right? But since then they've been kind of bastardized to mean just these nonsensical things. Like I think you ask any person on the street what is an introvert, and they'll say, "Oh, it's somebody who sits at home all the time alone," right?
Right.
And and they'll ask him, "What's an extrovert?" No, it's the guy who's the life of the party, right? And those are not the definitions that Jung had in mind when he coined those terms,
Yeah.
right? He was specifically talking about those terms as how one psychologically relates to their subconscious, right? You either integrate those lines of psychological development and become those things. And those within those lines of psychological development, there are contents: king, lover, warrior, magician, right? And within those are clusters of personality traits, right? And the way I describe those clusters of personality traits are the virtues in philosophy, right? Um, those are those personality traits, obviously, in their fullness, in their wholeness. When you've integrated them, that's what they become. Uh, and then, if you're an extrovert and you relate to the subconscious through projection, you are going to seek those qualities in someone else, right? Which we do most often in uh relationships, right? With a spouse, or a boyfriend or girlfriend. look for those traits that we are lacking, right? And we say, "Oh, you complete me," right? That's what people say all the time. But the idea is that you don't find someone else that completes you so much as you are on a journey to wholeness within yourself, right? You have to develop those traits rather than allowing someone else in a relationship to hold those things for you. Um, and that's how you kind of develop yourself. But you can do that right through a relationship, right? You can learn how that person has integrated those personality traits and then use those same things to develop them within yourself. And that would be a healthy thing to do rather than some kind of a relationship that's codependent, where you are allowing someone else to hold that energy so that you don't have to be that, right? And you're and then you get into a situation where you're codependent and you're withholding this from each other, this energy from each other, and it becomes this very kind of dysfunctional, uh crappy
Yeah.
relationship,
So
which
would you
most
say
people
that
find themselves in.
a healthy relationship is where either, both parties are operating in the fullness of all four of the Moore's archetypes,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Or um, each party to the relationship is kind of a sponsor to the other party,
Yeah.
and you're kind of growing together into the fullness of those archetypes.
Right. As long as you are, I would say it's a healthy relationship as long as you are, you understand what your goal is. Your goal is wholeness, right? And your goal is to cultivate each other's traits. But I will say that what ends up happening because of the nature of reality is that once you develop those things within yourself, you don't need the other person. And so you don't feel drawn to them, which means you're not attracted to them anymore. And a lot of people don't understand that that's the dynamic that has happened within a relationship, right? You cultivate those things within yourself. You don't need that person anymore, and they are actually unattractive to you now. Because not only have you cultivated yourself, but you have cultivated yourself beyond the point where that person is. And so
Okay,
that
so
you
question for you right
yeah.
now. In order to perpetuate the species, we need people to come together and have babies, and typically that's done in a relationship. And I think most studies will show that um, I think regardless of the gender of the parents, growing up in a in a cohesive family structure tends to produce healthiest outcomes.
Mhm.
So if because it sounds like what you're suggesting is that if you're really healthy and whole and integrated as a person, you're not going to be in a relationship and you're not going to be having kids.
That can be true for the most part, which I think, so there's a trend recently that it's not a fluke where people are coupling up just to have children, right? But they aren't attracted to each other, right? They're not in a relationship, right? But they want to have kids, right? And so does the other person, but they don't necessarily like, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot of people are finding that they're not attracted to other people in that way. And so, I mean, there's many different ideas of what a family structure could look like, right? It doesn't have to be, uh, you know, Ward and June Cleaver.
Right.
Uh, it can be lots of other things. So, um, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't
Absolutely.
see anything wrong with
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. I think the important thing is that, you know, um, there's psychological wholeness in the household.
Yes. Right. And I could say that that's also important in civilization writ large because your kids, they go to school. They're not with you all day long,
Yeah.
right? They go to school and they're taught by a teacher. And if that teacher isn't psychologically whole, then the child has nothing to model, right? There's no psychological model that they can hold in their mind and say, this is the ideal. And this is where I am trying to get. Um, this is what I'm trying to develop myself into.
Yeah. And they're
And if
also
you,
taught by their peers.
yeah, right. And so, you need other people to be psychologically whole as well, not just you as a parent, although it's helpful.
Yeah.
Um, that psychological wholeness has to be seen in other places as well.
So I want to stay on this thread of introversion versus extroversion. And let's just say, okay, what does an extrovert look like from your perspective?
Um,
And how is it misunderstood?
well, it's misunderstood in that it isn't just it isn't just a personality trait, right? It's a plane of existence, right? You're as an extrovert, you're existing on the physical plane, and so you are caught up in everything that is physical, right? That is what is real to you. Um, and so you chase one emotion after the next. You live kind of a chaotic life. Um, you're a partier, maybe you're a drinker, or and you're always looking for this wholeness, but you're looking for it physically, right? You're not because you don't have that psychological modeling. You've never had that introvert in your life that could show you this is psychologically what a mature adult looks like,
Right.
right? And so we have these ideas of what it means to be masculine or feminine or and what those things look like, and they're not necessarily correct.
Well,
Um,
okay. So you would, I think, um, your definition, you talk a lot about Myers-Briggs personalities,
yeah, mhm,
right? And so introversion and extroversion in the context of Myers-Briggs personality types would be aligned with your definition of,
yeah,
your definition, but the definition that you subscribe to and that you
yes,
think is important.
yeah. I'm
Um,
glad you brought that up.
okay. And those definitions of introversion and extroversion would correlate to kind of a common definition of introversion versus extroversion, which is liking to be around people or wanting to spend more time on one's own,
Mhm.
right?
Not necessarily,
Okay.
because I would say that I can I can go to a party and be very social and be very um I can mingle, I can make conversations,
But
I can
here's
have fun,
okay.
right?
Here's the fundamental question though, is does that, and I think probably most of us are like a mix and probably just like lean one way or the other. But I think the question is the fundamental question about are you an introvert or an extrovert is, do you get energy from being around people or do you get energy from being alone? And I probably get energy from both, right? But I probably prefer the balance, more of my time to be on my own than around people.
Mhm. I would tend to agree with that, but I think that when people say being alone, and not being around people. Um, I think the motivation for that is not necessarily for in terms of an introvert and an extrovert, is not completely understood, really.
Okay.
Uh,
Great.
and this is the deal, right? And I think that this is why a lot of this stuff is so confusing, is that uh these personality traits don't necessarily, it's not a one for one correlation, right, with the psychological ideas, right? In other words, like I would say I spend a majority of my time alone, not because I like being alone, but I like thinking,
Right.
right? I like to be in my own thoughts and chew on things, and you're not doing that if you're engaging with another individual, right? It's a distraction from that. It's an extroversion. So I tend to be alone because I like thinking. I like to be in thought. Um, and so that's not that I am afraid of human interaction or something like that. And that's why I'm alone, right? The motivation is completely different. Uh so in other words, you can be an extrovert and be an extrovert in the way that you are afraid of physical or are afraid of social interaction. And that is a very extroverted thing, and that's why you spend the majority of your time alone. Or
Okay.
you can be alone because you like to think, right?
Yeah.
And you can't think with another person, right? So, or maybe you like to read, which is a very kind of a thing that you do alone, right? It's and to be wrapped in thought, and it's because you like that, and not because you're afraid of social interaction, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think this is starting to make a lot of sense. Yeah.
So a lot of the time when people just throw these terms around, they don't really they don't really know what they're talking about, right? Well, are you talking about someone who could be social but chooses not to because they like to do things that just so happen to take place alone, right? And they're not afraid of social interaction. They just like those types of activities that happen when they're alone, right? And that's very much myself. I don't have a problem going out in public and interacting with people and speaking with people and engaging with people. I love that, right? But I also love thinking. And I love reading and things like that. Yeah, the waters get very murky, when you try to kind of nail these things down, because I don't think, and I really believe that it's only something that you can really kind of define if you've been through worked through this process and really thought about it, uh, and kind of done your research, that you can then begin to teach and nail these things down.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked about this before, because some of these personality clusters are things like virtues, like we said, like you don't procrastinate, right? But um procrastinate,
Okay.
that's the thing, right?
Yes. So
What are
this
you
is I
procrastinating?
actually okay, I want to stick on the point of procrastination
Yeah.
because I noticed in your book, um, the night that uh the female being came to you, before that was one of the only times in your life where you practiced procrastination. You left your shirt on the closet door.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, I mean, it was significant enough that you wrote that in your book.
Yeah.
Bound to write that in your book. And I'm wondering,
Right.
is there a correlation there? What's the significance there?
So the significance there for me was that um I mean the significance too within the story is that um I'm not someone who puts things off, right? And I'm a kind of a very orderly type of individual, and I don't think that an open closet door is neat, right? You have this closet door open, things are hanging in there. It doesn't look neat usually, just because that's the nature of a closet, right? And not that I keep a messy closet, but you know, I just don't like seeing that, right? I don't like seeing the disorder of a closet, so I keep closet doors closed, right? Because I think that that's the way they should be kept. And so it was unusual that I would have left that door open, right? But I left that door open because I had come home earlier and changed in a hurry, and I threw my shirt over the door, and I was like, I'll get it later. Whatever. I'm leaving the house, right? I'm in a hurry. So I left, and then I came back, took a shower, went to bed, and then I looked and I saw my closet door was open with the shirt hanging on it, and I was like, get it. Forget it. I'm too tired. Right. And so the significance of that is that when I woke up and there was a being then in my room, like as I'm looking around my room, I'm looking around and I see my open closet door just as I left it before I
Right.
went to bed, right? And so it's not as though this was a dream. Does that make sense?
It was
Because
a
in a
reality
dream,
marker for you.
right, that's not something I normally would have done.
Yeah.
And so to see that kind of was confirmation for me that I'm not in a dream. This is actually my room.
Right.
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 Um, and I know the difference between a dream and being awake. Right. Even though to some people they could seem very similar, you can tell the difference.
And so I guess the next question then is, did you create that reality marker because something was encouraging you to do so, or for what reason?
Yeah. I mean, I think that,
Maybe you're not able to answer that question, but it's
no, I mean, I think I can answer that question. I don't believe in coincidence. Right? So even if something happens that's out of the ordinary, there's no such thing as coincidence, and there's a reason that that happened,
yeah.
right? And so that's kind of the way I view everything that happens now. Uh, there's no such thing as coincidence. So what does it mean? And sometimes you can discern what it means. A lot of the time you can't, right? Because we just aren't as familiar with the nature of reality as we should be. And so we can't always discern these things. Um, but you can discern quite a bit. Um, yeah.
So I have another question for you about that incident, which is, so the being projects some kind of monitor like
Hmm.
device, and I think later on in the book you speculate that that was a conscious projection of hers. Uh,
Yeah.
but you also write about the light from your TV screen, and you don't mention like falling asleep with your TV on or leaving your TV on, but you talk about the light from your TV, and I'm wondering, do you fall asleep with the TV on? And also, is there, in your mind, a correlation between the entity displaying a monitor to you and you having your own TV on?
I don't know. I mean, I don't really necessarily make that connection. At that point in my life, I would usually fall asleep with the TV on. Um, I don't know why I did that. Why I would always do that.
Yeah. The thing
Um,
that came to my mind was it was, I think we can all agree that TV isn't the healthiest indulgence, but
No.
we all do it, and that's fine. But it made me think of a Harvard study that tracked happiness over the course. It had a lot of people. I think JFK was part of this study, but it was tracking like what is the source of happiness in a person's life.
Hmm.
And TV is something that isolates us, right? It takes us away from people, and it projected a screen of a relationship of yours.
Hmm.
And the act of generation came from the relationship, right? And so this Harvard study established that the number one factor in happiness in human life is our relationships.
I would say yes to some extent, but I would say the actual source of our happiness is wholeness,
Yeah,
right? And however we get there, but the thing is that with that wholeness, the way most people cultivate that wholeness, I think, is through relationships,
that's
through
right.
psychological modeling,
That's
right?
right. Yeah. And
And so,
also, I think, how does a whole person exist? And I think the key here is that it's healthy relationships that are the source of happiness, right? And healthy
mhm,
relationships must exist in wholeness. Um, and I guess I come back to this idea of like generative balance,
mhm,
and one of the things I'm thinking about is Buddha and the middle way, where Buddha practiced hedonism, which I think we'll both agree is extroversion. Um,
mhm.
but Buddha also practiced asceticism, which maybe is also a form of extroversion,
It is, yeah.
where you're just depriving yourself of,
Mhm,
of material material things, right?
right.
And he found that both of those states of existence were out of balance, and so landed on the middle way as
Mhm,
path to enlightenment, right?
mhm. Yeah, absolutely. There's a great documentary about the life of Buddha. I think it's narrated by Richard Gere maybe or something like that. But I think it was I saw it on PBS and it was really good. I know I've tweeted a link to it before, so if you want to look through my Twitter, you'll
Yeah,
find it. But
I'll take a look for it.
um, one of the things that I will say about that, about asceticism and why that is an extroversion, is because so when people look at somebody who's found uh quote unquote enlightenment, right? When you see such a person, you'll see that they live very simple lives, right? They don't have a lot of stuff. They don't need a lot of stuff. And so a lot of people will falsely think, well, then I must deprive myself to be like that. Right. But the thing is, if you're psychologically developing yourself, you won't feel like you have deprived yourself of anything in living such a simple life.
Right.
I don't feel like an ascetic, but people would certainly look at my lifestyle and say, "You're an ascetic." Right? Because you don't have all of these bells and whistles that all these other people love to have. You don't drive a Mercedes, you don't drive a Jaguar, you don't care about that shit. Uh, and I do, right? And so the only way I could not have those things is if I'm depriving myself of it.
Yeah.
But what you have to understand is that if you are an extrovert, right, not only are you looking for wholeness in other people, but you look for wholeness in things that are symbolic of the psychological wholeness that you're
Yeah.
looking for.
Even if you're looking for the omission of those things.
Right. And so So when you're omitting those things, you're psychologically depriving yourself of that projection, and it hurts, right? Because that's just the way the way that works um because you have not developed that thing within yourself, and so you have to project it. You will do one or the other. You will either project it or you will embody it. And if you're projecting it, you're going to feel like you're depriving yourself of everything, and so you're going to feel like an aesthetic who's starving themselves to death, uh, and you're going to feel like you're suffering. Like suffering is what you have to do to gain enlightenment.
Yeah,
Somehow, people say, which is not the truth at all. The object is to not feel deprived because you're not projecting, right? Um, And so that's the key. That's the psychological key there. That's why depriving yourself is in fact an extroverted act,
yeah,
right? Because it's reaching into the physical for
that's
the
right.
meanings of those symbols and things. It's not reaching into the mind.
Yeah. And the emphasis is still on things. It's the
Yeah,
denial of things.
right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Whereas if you're introverting, the things just don't matter, right?
Right, right. Because you're no longer looking for those symbols outside yourself because you have them whole within yourself.
Yeah.
And so those symbols don't matter to you anymore.
And you get to a point where you're just using things to accomplish your own uh
Right.
objectives internally.
Yeah, I mean, and anything you have is completely utilitarian.
Yeah.
It has no more meaning to you other than utilitarianism.
And so on that note, in the book, you describe the ideal state of existence and you talk about a few elements. You talk about wearing the same clothes, right? Like functional, non-toxic
Yeah.
clothes. You talk about working 24 hours a day. I want to get into that because I think that can be uh, misunderstood
Yeah.
pretty easily. And no personal property. And I think that that's worth exploring on its own as well. And then,
Yeah.
yeah, do you wanna talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as I said, like you wouldn't so if you're not projecting, you have no need for things, right? You have no need for personal property. Um One of the things about wholeness is that
Well, you so and just being super literal here, you do have needs, right? You have like if you're
yeah,
gonna
of
stay alive, you
course.
need clothes, right?
Right.
You
Mhm.
need food. So
Uh-huh.
you need things, right?
I so that that's kind of a difficult question to answer
Okay.
because something that you also realize is that there's no such thing as death either, right? So do you really need food? Maybe not, you know.
You you can die. Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, and will that matter?
But okay, well, I think it will matter because I think so you one of the books you read during initiation I think was Life Beyond Death.
Mhm.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And I think I haven't read Life Beyond Death, but I've, read or listened to I think one of the things I read was Michael Newton's Journey of Souls. Was one. But I think in any time where people are exploring the afterlife or the life between lives, whatever it's called, and they're encountering souls. Wherever suicide comes up, is it is you know I think typically is viewed as a mistake or a breaking of like your life contract,
Right.
right? And so and I think probably giving your life for another or um, some kind of martyrdom might be treated differently. I don't know. Um, But if you're just going to intentionally deprive yourself of food to the point, starve yourself to death and die, with
Right.
that, number one, do you agree that suicide is not the thing we should be doing? And two, I guess, do you agree that that would be suicide?
Yeah, I agree that suicide is not a thing that we should be doing. And I also think that something that I say very often is that suicidal ideation is actually the extroverted end of initiation, right? Because
Right.
what you're looking for is you are looking to kill out these false ideas in the mind. That part of you has to die, right? But as an extrovert, if you're projecting this energy, you're going to be getting suicidal ideation, is what you're going to be feeling, right? Because you're not relating to that energy correctly. You're relating to it as an extrovert. And so suicidal ideation is the result, right? And so that's also very different from if you find yourself in a situation where someone who is an extrovert comes to you and says, "You're going to do what I want you to do, or I'm going to deprive you of food," right?
Yeah.
And are you at that point sovereign over your own mind enough to know that I'm not going to do what you're going to tell me to do
Right.
because I know there's no such thing as death. So deprive away,
Which would be giving your
right?
life for a higher cause.
Ex- Precisely. Yes. In that you're not going to control my mind. I'm the only one that does that. Right. And that's why this kind of thing is so scary to, uh, you know, in terms of societal norms, because everybody typically has this handle on their back and you can kind of grab people by that handle and manipulate and move them. But then when you come across someone like me, right, and you can't move me,
Right.
right? And that can be frightening to you as an extrovert because you don't know what to do with that at that point, right? This is not something you encounter someone who is not afraid of you or is not intimidated by your bullshit,
Right.
let's say.
And
I mean,
historically, people who are like that and do make a name for themselves publicly, a lot of them do end up being killed.
yeah, they end up
Yeah.
being burned at the stake.
Yeah. Socrates would be an obvious example of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, he was killed by the state. Um, and countless others. I mean, how many, ex monks or excommunicated monks have been burned at the stake or declared heretics because of their views, which
Yeah.
kind of align with the stuff that we're talking about, you know?
Or scientists.
Yeah, exactly. Hmm.
So, okay. So I think coming back to it, I think we can, barring extenuating circumstances like giving your life for a higher cause, it is right and proper to sustain our life on our human life.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But I kind of wanted to make that distinction
Yeah,
because one of the important parts about consciousness is understanding that you are sovereign over your own mind,
yeah,
right?
and
Completely.
so while we want to perpetuate our life, we don't want to cling to our life out of fear.
Correct. Yes. Uh-huh. Because if someone, wants us to do something that is immoral or unethical, otherwise they will deprive us of life, then we can go ahead and make that decision and say, well, I know that death is not final, so
Yeah,
I fear no such thing.
or we
Um,
will ourselves uh, do unethical things in order to perpetuate our own lives.
Precisely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, um, okay, so I have a question about wearing the same clothes. So to me, wearing the same clothes is essentially, um, can we say, projecting aesthetically in many ways.
I don't know. I mean,
And
the reason why.
I'll tell you where I'm going with this
Okay,
is,
go ahead.
like, let's say fashion, right? Which you're talking about.
Yeah.
No fashion. We want just functional clothes, right? Function, form, not important, as it does not relate to where it does not relate to function. Um, I think so. The first time I read your book, for some reason, I bucketed artwork into that, but I think that you would probably say that artwork quite important.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to talk about artwork, look around. I mean, this is all the world, the universe is a created thing.
yeah,
It's a tapestry. It's a work of art. Um, so art, of course, is important. I mean, it's all about art and creation, um, and also storytelling.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, a lot of artwork is storytelling, including,
Yeah, and
not obviously like sculptures. There are stories embedded in sculptures or paintings, or architecture. Uh,
right. But I will say that, pre and post uh the psychological change in terms of on a societal level, on a civilization level, right? I think that artwork becomes less important because artwork it's a projection of the subconscious, right? And if you're living in the subconscious, why do you need to project the subconscious? I mean,
right.
it what a lot of people don't understand is that there is, in being connected to the subconscious and being with that, it's, I mean, if you could imagine what heaven would feel like, that would be it, right? I mean, and I think that for me, obviously, that is where the conception of heaven comes from. It's a state of mind, right? It's
Yeah,
not a place. Uh, and so, to be ultimately connected and a part of that creative tapestry of the universe that you now are a co-creator in, art becomes the world. Right? Does that make
yeah,
sense?
yeah,
Like your creations become uh things that you can genetically create using CRISPR or whatever.
right.
And so the world is your tapestry.
Yeah. You're saying that maybe
You're
today we're all,
creating life is what you're doing,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. And so in some ways, as useful as, and so I think what you're kind of talking about here is what Peter Levenda talks about in God's Man and War about, what do they call it? Cargo cults,
Cargo cults, yeah.
cargo
Hmm.
cults, where, you know, uh, during World War II, the term comes from Pacific Islanders, as they saw the Allies, and I guess and probably the Japanese as well, setting up airstrips on islands that normally don't weren't contacted by modern man, but became strategically important, and so the militaries would land and offload supplies which the indigenous populations found very useful, and so they
Right.
started building their own airstrips, which did not really serve much of a function. Our art, on the other hand, does serve a function, but you're saying is in many ways has characteristics of is a poor imitation for a higher form of creation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and you're right. It would be kind of the equivalent of like a cargo cult version of what creation actually is, right? Um, and you can, even though you can see very fine examples of art, like and I tweet about fine examples of art in the physical world
Yeah,
that are insane, right? But when you get to a certain level and you can marry science and spirituality, you come to understand that this is your job, co-creation, right? That the physical universe as you see it was created by something with two arms, two legs, a torso, and a head, because that's your job in this, right? That's your role.
you think
Uh
that literally,
yes.
literally 2 arms, 2 legs, and a torso.
Yep.
Okay,
Marrying science and spirituality, right? In such a way that you understand the true nature of things, you know. There's so little science knows as a result of not marrying those two things and then kind of extrapolating out from there, that I think science looks at a lot of things and they see no solution, right? To something, when
like
ultimately there would be,
faster than light travel, for example.
right, things like that. And I think that if you marry these two things, a solution to that would come very quickly. Um, Probably more so than you would expect, more quickly than you would expect.
Yeah. Well, okay, yeah. I guess during your initiation, you talk about just understanding that the being's form of travel was manipulating gravitational waves,
Yeah. Mhm.
and
Yeah,
that's
but that,
right.
obviously that goes back to the idea that you don't that science on a base level doesn't understand kind of basic principles of what governs the universe and its physics, right? And that's what the Kabbalion is ultimately touching on, right? That vibration, how important vibration is, right? In not only changing one mental state to another, but that you can see vibratory motion is constant and it's everywhere, and it is a thread through which uh the nature of reality runs. And so you can see that, on an atomic level, you've got an atom that's kind of vibrating, and it's got motion. And then on a much larger scale, you've got a solar system where planets are orbiting around a sun, and it's that too is the changing of our seasons. It is a vibrational change on a very large scale, and that's happening on the level of the galaxy as well, uh, and probably on a much larger level that we
Yeah.
can barely
So,
even perceive.
why did the principle of vibration specifically come to mind for you in talking about intuiting knowledge?
Just because I think scientifically speaking, we don't really understand what I just said, the fact that vibration is in everything, and we don't recognize it as such when we're living our lives every day, right? That the changing of a season is a vibratory motion,
Hmm.
on a large scale.
Yeah.
It's a cycle, right? And that's what a cycle is. It's a vibration. And so,
And
uh,
also a reflection of the principle of polarity.
yeah, I think on just a very basic level, the fact that we don't understand that is problematic for science, right? Uh, that there isn't a recognition
Well, does
of how
science
these things
understand that?
go.
Because
Say what?
I mean, and but I think it is well understood that anything above 0 degrees Kelvin, there's going to be a constant state of vibration,
Right. Hmm.
right? And that is that not well understood by scientists?
I don't think so. No, I don't
Okay.
think so. Not in the way that it needs to be.
Okay. Are you
I
able to describe how it needs to be?
Well, like I said, like, so, you got to understand that this is a basic tenet of the universe, just like creation is, right? Vibration is everything. Um, and so it runs through everything. It's a cyclical thing, and to include life, right? There's a life cycle for things. And so but we don't necessarily think of those things as being vibrational, do we? We don't.
Okay.
At all. Where that thought doesn't even occur to us, even though that's what it is, right? And
Maybe.
so,
I mean,
and
I
so
know.
there's
Yeah.
this idea that if you don't understand the basics, then you're not going to see the difference between micro and macro scale.
Right.
So in other words, like you have Newtonian physics, which is different from you know uh uh very micro levels of physics, but there's often this need to like reconcile those two worlds, right? Because they're different. Supposedly they're different,
Right. Right. So yeah, I think
but
I,
what I'm saying
I'm
is
not a
that they're
scientist,
not.
but they're like very different. Uh, I think that very hard for scientists are not able to uh, in analyzing the subatomic world. You need a completely different framework than understanding the physical world at our level or at the you know superatomic level, above atomic level.
Yeah, but I would argue that there's nothing to reconcile between the two.
Yeah, yeah,
But that's not what science would tell you. That science would
exactly
tell
right.
you that
Yes,
there's a difference, and
yes,
there's actually no difference, because if you understand that in Newtonian physics, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction, you can see that on the very small scale as well. But on the small scale, a lot of science will not accept what those actions and reactions are. In other words, there's a lot of scientists that don't want to accept the idea that consciousness influences that level of uh, reality,
right.
right?
Well, yeah, it certainly doesn't want to explore it, right?
No, they don't.
Yeah,
Right. Because the implications of that is that mind can influence matter, right? Which
yeah, which I
we
think is
know that it,
accepted. I mean, Schroden, the double slit experiment, I think
yeah,
displays this like pretty unequivocally, and I think it is understood that the observer plays a key role in quantum mechanics, but I think actually investigating the nature of the observer is not included.
right. And that's where we start talking about, for every action, there's an equal
Mhm.
and opposite reaction, right? And the scale doesn't matter.
Yeah,
And the only thing that would be argued is that they refute there's some aspects of science and scientists, I think some of them would dispute this, like that consciousness has anything to do with it. And there
right,
are a lot of them that will say it's just the tools that you're using that are causing that observation to happen that way,
right. Like the
rather
light
than
sensor. Yeah,
right, yeah. And so I think that this is something that is still very much disputed in science. I don't
yeah.
think that there's a definitive answer yet
I
for
think
them.
that's
I
right.
would say the question has been answered for me. I don't. I don't need a scientist to tell me what the answer to this is, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about working 24 hours a day and what.
So my whole thing about that was just that, we're born to work. That's what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
Uh, and I can work a lot and not really mind it. More so than most people can. And when I was going through my experiences, I came to understand that, in dreams and in sleep, there are things that you can do that are also could be considered work, and so you don't need to ever be at rest, really. I guess my thing is that I'm at rest even if I'm working,
Yeah.
right? Because if you don't mind it, then it doesn't matter, right?
And
Mind over matter.
does the content of what you're doing matter?
Not really.
Not really.
No, I can do any kind of task for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
But if you
But
if you read Plato's Symposium, that's one of the ways he describes Socrates, right? And I certainly noticed this throughout my life that I can work on something and other people will stop. Other people doing the same task will stop at some point. And then I kind of look around and realize I'm the only one that's still working, you know? And everybody else has gone home and they don't care
yeah.
and they've left. Uh and that's just the way my life has always been. I don't
And
know.
did you find that in the Navy as well?
Yeah. Mhm.
So when you were deployed, you talk about working,
Yeah,
12 to 20 hours a day.
right.
And did you work more than your peers?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah. Yeah, and I didn't, but I could, like I said, I could do that because I didn't mind it, but most people are like, "Ah, I can't wait to get out of here. I can't wait to leave work." Like I can't because as I say, they live one emotion to the next, right? And so their current emotion is telling them to get the hell out of there and to not work anymore and to jump into the fun bucket and the good bucket instead of the bad bucket, you know?
Okay. And so is having fun bad?
No,
Okay.
no, but what I'm saying is don't put things in those buckets. Everything should be kind of in the fun bucket,
Right.
right?
Okay. So creating financial models on an Excel spreadsheet.
Oh yeah, I could do that.
Fun
Probably.
bucket?
I mean, I don't know how to do that necessarily,
Right.
but if someone taught me, the skill, I would not mind doing it. You
If
know what I
you're
mean?
if you're doing that for years,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would not present a challenge to you?
No.
Okay. Would you want to do other things?
Sure. So here's the thing is I'm curious about everything. So no matter what I'm doing, I can always learn something from it.
Yeah.
And and so I'm always kind of um striving to be better, and striving to enjoy it, right? By learning new things about it. Um and part of learning new things about something is to do the mundane and the daily things
Yes.
that people kind of shy away from, and I don't shy away from those things.
I guess, and the reason I'm asking these questions is I'm wondering, um, one, if there's like particular work that's going to give you more satisfaction or less satisfaction. or is it just the act of working that gives you satisfaction?
Well, I mean, obviously, it has to be something productive, right?
Right.
Like, because the idea is to be generative, right? So if you're doing something that ultimately is for the greater good or is an introverted end, then you can do it and feel good about it. So what you're saying about creating spreadsheets, I would have no problem doing that. If you're talking about financial spreadsheets, that may be a different answer because like I don't like finance to me is just kind of so much bullshit.
So,
You know what I
okay.
mean?
Yes. So here's where I'm going with that is people, when you're growing up, uh, some people say like, just get a job and support yourself, right? Like build a life
Right. Hmm.
and then within that, people might say something like follow your heart, right? And do what you feel like your heart is calling to is kind of the way it'll be phrased. And I'm
Right.
wondering, what do you think of that?
My take on all of this is that I think that we should be approaching the subconscious consciously, right? And that's the only responsible way to do it. Uh, you can listen to any of these, uh, lectures by Dr. Robert Moore, who he gets into a lot of detail about different dichotomies that you can have in terms of archetypal makeup, where maybe you're extroverted in the king warrior aspect or the king magician or the warrior magician. And if you're a warrior magician and you're extroverted in those two aspects and you chase that as a kind of a career, you end up becoming a lawyer, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing. It's not because there are different types of lawyers, right?
Right.
Um, and lawyers do different types of things. And there are lawyers that create the world, and there are lawyers who destroy the world. I mean, it's a double-edged sword, and it depends on what. So that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
You need to be someone who creates the world and not destroys it.
Right. And so it comes back to you need to be in your wholeness
Yeah.
and then figure out what is my unconscious in its wholeness calling for.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I would say. Um, and if you see that your consciousness is calling you towards being like a patent attorney where you're just gonna fuck people over all day long, like, or an attorney for a health insurance company or something like some awful job like that, right? Right, that is ultimately just gonna decide that, well, we spent too much money on your insurance and you're not worth keeping alive anymore. And so we're just going to end your life.
Right. Right.
Right.
Okay. And that's just to be clear, like there are patent attorneys who do very good work in the world as
Yeah,
well.
that's true.
Yeah.
Hmm. But there are also patent attorneys that uh, will sue people who have actually invented something,
Yeah.
but because they have the backing of a huge corporation, they can tie you up in court uh, into perpetuity, and
Yes, they
you
can.
will never do anything with that patent unless you sell it to them
Yeah.
for a song,
Yeah.
and they will fuck you over that way, right? That happens too. So, what kind of lawyer are you going to be? That's what I would ask.
Yeah. Okay. So I think this is a very good point to segue. Kind of it is not necessarily what you do, it's how you do it. Um,
Yeah. Mm,
and so I think about technology, right? And there's a lot of
right.
fear around artificial intelligence in particular today. And
Uh-huh.
also, there's a lot of reports of messages from interaction with non human intelligence. And one that comes to mind pretty prominently is the aerial school landing, where
Mhm.
the children reported the being that landed saying, like, your technology is bad and you need to take care of the environment, right?
Right.
I
Mhm.
think you call it mechanization, which I think is
Uh-huh.
essentially like autonomous robots driven by artificial intelligence, um,
Mhm.
as being essential to our term survival.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so, I think uh, what you'll probably say is it's not technology, it's what you do with the technology. But maybe speak to that.
Sure. So the reason why I view that as essential is because um, at some point in our development, if this is in fact how we develop, I'm not even sure that it necessarily is. I have a couple of theories here that could go either way.
Yeah, let's hear those theories as well.
Um, so one theory is that, you create technology and you mechanize and automate all kinds of processes so that you don't have to then do anything. You don't have to work, right? And so that gives you more time to then sit and think and, to develop yourself um, in kind of a psycho spiritual way, because the idea is that you're peeling away from the physical world. And so you need to worry about that less and less, right? And so that's one model at how you end up, eventually you're in a craft that'll take you anywhere you want to go as fast as you want to get there. Because there has to be that psycho-spiritual growth that allows you to maintain that technology and not kill yourself with it,
Right.
um, via the extrovert, right? And then there's this other I idea that, and I don't know which one is true, that actually need the phenomenon because there's no way out of this, right? In other words, the surface of this planet is for the purpose of growing consciousness, and that process can only ever be affected on an individual level, and so individuals end up getting plucked out, right? It's a harvest type situation,
Right.
which is the way it's always been described historically, as the harvest, right? Harvest of soul. um and so you'll be then taken out of this situation, and that on the surface of this planet what exists is the filth that the harvest grows from, and the filth will never be anything other than the filth, right, that the harvest comes out of. In other words, that there's no ending, no grand finale here. It's just this perpetual garden, and individuals are plucked out
Right.
here and there throughout history, and that's just the way it goes.
And is it possible that both are true?
It could be, yeah. I don't, like I said, I don't know the ultimate answer to that
Yeah.
question. I know it's one or the other. Um, so if it's going to be one or the other, why not just count on it being both and work towards that end?
Right.
That is my thinking. Uh, so why not then try to teach people to be ultra responsible so that we can get to a level where our technology can then uh, take care of us?
Yeah.
And that is something that was demonstrated to me within my experiences. I was kind of looking into this automation and mechanization thing, and I was like, God, that's great. Like we could do this, you know? And then at one morning I wake up and I go to turn on my tablet, and it won't work. I got the blue screen of death. I grab my phone, blue screen of death. I go to my laptop, blue screen of death, right? And I realize these things are connected, right? I've got all of these pieces of technology that I own are all connected because they're easier to use that way. And if you get a virus on one, it's going to spread to the whole thing, and it's going to ruin your technology. And
Yeah.
I was incensed by this. I was so angry because I thought we can't do this, right? We can't do this because some asshole is going to just create a virus to destroy things for the sake of destruction, which is what had just happened to all of my electronics. Someone created this to destroy my stuff, basically, and that to me was devastating, right? Because it was pointed out to me that yes, people exist that will do this. And so your tolerance for these types of people has to be less and less the more technologically advanced you go, because the more technologically advanced you go, the more opportunity there is for a single individual having a bad day to ruin everybody's lives, right? And so there has to be a give and take. The tolerance level has to come down, way down.
Yeah.
We have to understand these things about our psychology so that we can nip them in the bud. Um,
And the emphasis on true psychological mental health also has to become paramount.
yes. Uh-huh. Absolutely. Like this stuff that I'm talking to you about, introverts versus extroverts, we need to teach this stuff starting in elementary school, right? So that
Yeah.
children understand who the introverts are and who the extroverts are and who they should be psychologically modeling,
Yeah.
right? Because there's a right way and a not necessarily a wrong way, but the way we've done things in the past, I would say. Um and we can no longer,
Yeah.
Um, but we know that when civilizations collapse, technology vanishes, right? We've got the Antikythera mechanism, which was discovered in an 1800s. In the 1800s, it was part of a ancient Greek shipwreck, and they refused to believe that the Greeks built this thing because it looked like something modern,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And yet it was 2,000 years old. So uh, we know that these things disappear. There were coin operated vending machines that existed in ancient Roman temples, right? You'd put a coin in there.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
Yes. And
Yeah.
it would spit out a little ball of soap and you would wash your hands. Um, and after Rome collapsed, when was the next time we had any kind of a vending machine like that?
Right. Right.
It was 2,000 years later, you know?
Well, you also lost, indoor plumbing, I think,
Yeah.
the cesarean section, so medical
Yes.
procedures.
Uh-huh.
Romans also had a form of concrete that was strengthened by
Yeah.
salt water, which we still haven't managed to reinvent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I watched a documentary on that, and I think it's absolutely incredible that you have, these slabs of Roman concrete that even today are curing and becoming more and more uh uh their strength is
Yeah,
increasing
stronger and stronger.
as they're there against the tide, and the tide is washing over it with the salt water, and the salt is seeping in and making it even more strong. It's insane.
Yeah,
2,000 years later, that is still a process that is happening within this concrete. I mean, it's
yeah.
crazy.
I think really really important to note that as we're talking about all these kind of esoteric, paranormal, supernatural, pretty out there subjects. And at the core of all of this is really a very down to earth subject, which is just like uh, psychological health and psychological wholeness, and just develop
Right.
minds properly.
Right.
Um, and so I think there's one takeaway: the Republicans are right, and we have a mental health crisis in this country.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely a mental health crisis, and I don't think anyone would argue with that. I
Yeah,
mean, when I was a kid, there were almost never school shootings or mass shootings, and today they're just like a daily occurrence. They
yeah,
happen every day, and it is insane how sick people have gotten, you know. And that needs to be corrected because we're in trouble.
yeah.
We are in deep trouble.
So, what would be
Uh,
your prescription?
um, to take seriously Jungian psychology and to start taking that on board and teaching it to people. Um, I think that Robert Moore is a great place to start with this. And if schools won't do it, then I think you as a parent should take it upon. I mean, as a citizen, I think it's a civic duty to take it upon yourself to study this stuff so that you can be a healthy, functioning individual of civilization. Because a civilization is built of individuals. And if you're only as strong as your weakest link, and you got too many weak links, the whole thing's going to fail.
Have you
And
considered lobbying? Yeah,
I certainly don't want to be in a situation where things fail to the point where there's going to be a last pair of pants, you know? Like like it could get that bad. It could. And so let's not go there, you know?
yeah. Have you considered lobbying for this politically?
No. I haven't. I mean, I don't think there's any point, to be honest with you,
Why
because
not?
there is too much extroversion, right? And so unless you come to a politician and you've got uh, a bag full of money for them, um, they don't want to hear it, you know?
Well, I actually okay, I would say that one notable exception to that is, and I'll bring it back to veterans lobbying for use of psychedelics.
Hmm.
And so, I think eh, and I think, veterans are a unique constituency because the nation owes them a huge debt. Um, and you yourself are a veteran. It's important.
Hmm.
And so I think where veteran mental health is concerned, I think it is possible to get um, bipartisan support for an issue without kind of bags of special interest money.
I would have to say, I think you're right. I think it is a worthy cause, for sure. Um, because I think that the research that's being done there could lead to other types of breakthroughs along the lines of what we're talking about, along the lines of initiation. Um, but I also think that something like that can be lobbied successfully because big pharma's behind it, right? Because
You can
they
make
have,
the same argument for psychedelics, though.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that is ultimately why politicians will listen, though, is what I'm saying. is that the political class in this country doesn't care about what's right or wrong. They only care about, well, how much money do you have and what are you going to give me? And that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah.
We're no longer in a situation where we're just going to do something because it's the right thing to do. Uh, and this is actually why we're in as much trouble as we are now,
Yeah.
because we can't do the right thing. We can only do the money,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Which is kind of a classical characteristic of,
Civilizations right before they
terminal
collapse.
corruption. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It is terminal corruption. Through and through. And I have yet to see, I don't see any politician out there today uh that's immune to that. I don't see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I totally agree. And I think that, and maybe they're out there and I just don't see them and you don't see them, but, I don't see them. Um, and I'm looking and I think, but that's, I would say, and I would like to end this on an optimistic note, which is, um, this podcast is about exploring what I see as an age of mounting crisis,
Yeah.
right? And in an age of mounting crisis, you would expect for hope the prospect of hope to become fainter and fainter. And yet we face we have faced very dark times before. And it is often, although this is cliche, that it is darkest before the dawn. And even in the personal experience, the personal individual experience of initiation, it is darkest right before it breaks.
Oh yeah, for sure. Uh-huh. And I think I don't view this situation as being any different than that.
Right.
Um which is why I say we could go either way. Um but once again, I'm going to get a little bit political here in that I'm going to point out exactly what is wrong with our two parties. And I will tell you, my whole life I've been a liberal, but liberals are spineless. They will not. They talk a big game, but they won't deliver. At the end of the day, they never deliver.
Yeah.
Um, and then on the right, um, where do I even start? I mean,
Well, I think it's the same sort of spinelessness on the right,
well, yeah, I think it is, but
ultimately. Yeah.
but I also think it's so there are a lot of people who are kind of taken aback by the fact that there's this whole alt-right movement within the Republican Party, and they're caught by surprise with this. I was not caught by surprise that this was a built-in, baked-in aspect of the Republican Party, because you had, even back in the 80s, you had David Duke would weigh in on politics, KKK member, right? Um, and then presidents would be asked, "Whoa, what do you think about what David Duke said?" And it's like you'd have people on the right saying, "I don't know who David Duke is," which of course is a lie.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Well,
that's what
Trump
politicians,
famously said that. Yeah.
right? But that's what politicians do. They lie, right? And
Yeah.
and so I don't expect much out of either party other than an inevitable stumbling towards the finish line of collapse. Because I don't think anyone has the balls to stand up and say, let's do it differently, right?
Well,
I don't see anyone on the horizon that has a big enough mind or personality to be able to do this.
I think that um, that's really like, you want to talk about it, introverted, extroverted. That's a reflection on each of us, uh,
Yeah.
because how
Hmm.
much are we as individual citizens within our society willing to look at ourselves, and the legacy of our history? And that's both on the right and on the left, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we can learn from history and not elect people that are gonna lie to us constantly.
Yeah.
But
But also people who are going to tell us uncomfortable truths, you know?
yes. Right. Right. But
And the
Plato,
uncomfortable truths that exist across the political spectrum. This
yeah,
really isn't like a right versus left thing. This
right.
is because you know, I know a little bit about how you live your life. I mean, I think like you basically live what most conservatives would consider like a pretty ideal life. You are like fully financially self-sufficient. You, I don't think, take anything from the government. You are
No.
you've essentially like pulled yourself up by your own bootstraps, as stupid as that saying is. Um so, while you are a liberal, you know, and I myself probably left of center, you live by your kind of personal lifestyle and the virtue that you live your life. I think most conservatives would be pretty on board with, and that's, I think,
Yeah.
also gets to kind of this distinction between liberal and conservative. A lot of it is like kind of illusory at the end of the day, I think.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that, to be honest, at the end of the day, these two parties don't exist. Right. I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is we're all human beings and we all want the same things. Right. But who are you going to believe and how do you want them to sell it to you
Yeah,
is kind of like what party you're going to be involved with.
yeah,
Uh and but also how gullible are you? Because you could be just taken for a ride,
yeah.
I mean, and I think we've all been taken for a ride
And by
for
the way, are you gonna stand up and hold your own guy accountable
accountable.
when they
Yeah.
fall short,
Oh, sure.
you know,
Yeah.
and go against, kind of the people who agree with you politically?
Right. Yeah. And I personally would never have any problem doing that, right?
For sure.
Um, I don't know. I don't know how deep in the weeds we should get with all of this, but look, if there are liberals who have broken the law, I've got no problem with them facing consequences for that,
Sure, sure,
right? If you can prove that in a court of law, okay,
sure.
you know, go to off to jail with you, you know?
Yeah,
I don't but that's I don't have heroes, right? And that's the thing is about this is that you don't have heroes, right? You are your own hero. You are your
yeah,
own savior,
yeah,
right?
yeah. And
You
also, like,
are sovereign.
every human being is a human,
Yeah.
and you should find fault with every human being. Every human being can improve themselves, right? There's no human being worthy of adulation,
Yeah.
or lionization, because that's um, we're not capable of it,
Right.
even at our
Exactly.
best. You know?
Right. Yeah, and like I said, I readily admit I'm not perfect. I am
Yeah.
a very flawed human being.
Which
Um,
is why the Constitution has been so successful, because it thoroughly recognizes our weaknesses.
yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, I think that's true. Um, but yeah, I mean, the whole idolization of people and the fact that there are some individuals that seem to not be able to do anything wrong in the eyes of others is just ludicrous. I mean, you're asking for trouble if
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
what
but
you're looking at.
also, like, look, we need political leaders, right? Certainly the way we're structured today, we need political leaders,
Right.
but where we're going, like, oh my gosh, society is in so many problems. We must have a leader to save us. Like,
Yeah.
that's a doomed aspiration.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, look at if you look at our history, it's almost as though like at these very crucial, pivotal points in our history, there has always been someone, right, who stepped up.
Yeah,
Right, you look at the Civil War and
yeah,
you've got Abraham Lincoln, right? And you look at World War II and you've got Roosevelt,
right.
right?
There's a
And
guy named Neil Howe who would call that figure the gray champion.
right, yeah, yeah. And so it's like where is that person now is what I'm wondering. Like who is that?
Yeah,
And what's taking you so long? Right? That's what I'm waiting for.
yeah. I guess I have many, many more questions and things that I would love to discuss with you. But I guess last question I'll ask today
Okay.
is it's been 6 years 7 years since you went through
Yeah.
completed initiation,
Uh,
and 5 years since your book came out. How many years since your book came out?
I think it came out, I think it was published in 2021,
Okay.
maybe early in 2021, maybe.
Okay.
So like maybe 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering how your perspective has changed in that time. Both how has kind of your own personal um, um, life, belief, consciousness evolved, and how have your uh, feelings for the world we live in evolved in that time.
I would say that my feelings for and my kind of perspective and outlook on things has become I would, to be honest, I'm gonna be brutally honest. I My perspective and my kind of view of things is not good. Uh, it's very cynical. Um, and I look around and I see what I can kind of understand what goes into an initiation and what makes a good initiate. And I see the majority of people um, are completely unwilling to do that. They could, but they won't. They will not. And that does not bode well for things in my mind. But
Well, I would say one thing is I don't think anyone, like essentially no one, really understands this, or near no one uh, has an understanding of this process of initiation that you're even talking about.
yeah, I would say that that's true.
And so, how much more attractive does it become if people understand it on some level, on some broad level?
I don't know. That's a good question. Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I know that in the past, in antiquity, certainly going through the Eleusinian mysteries was considered a very prestigious kind of thing, and if you were an initiate, it was like a badge of honor. It was uh, a free pass even on a lot of things. So, uh, but today, I don't know that people just don't take it as seriously. They don't think this stuff is real. They don't
Yeah.
think there's anything there. Um, which is why I think it's very important to discuss this in the ways that I do. Um, because I'm in doing so, I'm normalizing it,
Yeah.
right? Like we can talk about this stuff. We don't.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if you're normalizing. You're just introducing the
Right.
the just the concept of it.
Right.
And
Well,
that reminds me back to our earlier in our conversation we're talking about. I asked you, like, why are all these people writing in such coded language? Well, maybe one reason they're writing in coded language is because this process is institutionalized in society. And so where people know that it's there and know to look for it. And you've kind of uniquely written a book that is not in coded language. It is lays it all out plain as day, essentially.
right.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, but I want once again, I the reason why I'm doing that is to try to normalize these ideas.
yeah,
Uh because I think also people would put it in esoteric terms because they also don't want to, especially in stories that are written today in modern times, meaning like the past 100 or 200 years. I think a lot of people didn't want to be viewed as crazy
yeah,
either. So
yeah,
let me just
yeah,
write this fiction story,
yeah.
right? That you can
Or
read.
persecuted by the state religions.
Right.
I'm very much against this process.
And so I think if people see me talking about it normally, they'll feel, well, maybe I can talk about it normally. Yeah. And we can just have a normal conversation about this.
Yeah, yeah,
Um because I think certainly there have been people who have contacted me that won't even discuss this stuff with their families, right? I'm talking about like their close families, like their
yeah,
spouse or their children. They will mention none of this to them, but they've
yeah.
experienced all of it, right? And so that becomes very difficult uh to live a life that way. And so they hear me speaking in this way and they want to talk to me about it because I'm often the only person they can talk to about it, because
Yeah,
anyone else is just going to be like, "Oh, you're crazy. I don't let me get out of this conversation." And they won't go there. Uh so that's why it's important to me, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing.
and so I guess barring alien contact, how can someone go through initiation today or seek that out today?
Uh, I, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Dr. Robert Moore is a great place to start.
Yeah,
Start with the psychology, because ultimately we're talking about psychospiritualism here. That spiritualism and psychology are one and the same, in my opinion.
yeah,
They're exactly the same thing.
yeah,
And if you can go on Myers-Briggs, take a personality test, I can tell you I am an INFJ personality type, which is the rarest personality type in the world. Um, and you can look up what that means. And uh, if you go on a website called, I think, 16 Personalities, you can take the test for free. It gives you a rundown of each personality type, what it means.
and it's not a super precise test. It should just be noted.
Right. Well, the thing is, people say that, but I found it to be very precise for me. I was like, that is
Yeah,
right on the head when I
yeah.
was reading the description of that.
I took it 3 different times and got 3 different outcomes.
So here's what I tell people when they take this test, right? I tell them to go ahead and take the test, um, and um, and see where you fall. And then they'll often do that and come back to me with some kind of result. And then I'll say, okay, now take the test again. But when you take the test again this time, think to yourself, what what would my answer be if I were the ideal me, right? Like, so the way I took the test was I was like, well, what? Because it asked you, well, oh, how do you feel about this? How do you
Yeah.
feel about that? And that can change from 1 minute to the next with most people, but I kind of took it and I was like, well, what's always true for me? What is the ultimate truth? Not necessarily how do I feel about this at this particular moment in time, but what is always true uh about this? And so that's how I kind of the perspective through which I took the test.
Yeah.
And what is my ideal? Like how would I want to be if if I were honest and wanted as the ideal me, how would I react to this question?
Yeah.
Given no matter the circumstance, you know. Um, so I would ask people to take it with those two perspectives in mind and take it once and then take it again and see where you fall.
That makes
Because I
sense.
think I think when you're talking about your ideal self and what would always be true for you, uh, I think that's kind of a truer personality test because that's what you're striving towards, right?
Yeah.
That's what you want to be. And what you want to be may not be the best personality type. Uh, and I will say this one last thing about the personality type. I found that INFJ personality types are grossly overrepresented within the experiencer community. Um, in other words, it's like 1 to 2% of the population. But then when you have a room full of experiencers, it'll be like 50 to 75% INFJ,
Yeah.
which is enormously out of whack, right? That's not in keeping with statistically what you would expect to find in a normal population spread for any given
Yeah.
grouping of people, right? So there's that.
So I think in terms of books, I think Robert Moore is great
Yeah,
gathering knowledge. But in terms of protocols, you used a number of books through your process of initiation that gave you kind of breathing techniques, meditation techniques, concentration techniques, I guess meditation technique, but things like that.
right. Yeah. And I found that to be very helpful, all of that. Um, I came to understand that um basically so that I found that I was in an altered state of consciousness throughout most of the day. Um, in that I was able to put myself into what they call like the right brain, like that, and that would be like when you're doing something that's like uh kind of a monotonous task that's repetitive. Um and it's kind of a deep state of concentration is what it is.
Like an
And
Excel
I
spreadsheet.
What's that?
Like an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, right. Like doing yeah, like an Excel spreadsheet. But I found that I was in that kind of frame of mind most of my day and that I wasn't really thinking about anything in particular, right? And I never really associated that with being in an altered state of consciousness, but that's in fact what that is, right? That heightened state of concentration. And that state is a very hard won state because as I say, most people they migrate from one emotion to the next. And if you're able to just sit and be and not necessarily think of anything, that's not something most people can do,
Yeah, yeah,
right? They always have something in their head,
yeah.
but
And I think that's actually like a great observation,
yeah,
or a very important observation, which is, and this is one place where I think science coming together with uh, spirituality can be very helpful. Because I personally found that the physiology of spirituality is very important, and you're sort
yeah,
of alluding to that with kind of the importance of just your state of consciousness, which is really your brainwaves, right?
right, yeah, yeah, and I mean that's something that you, as a scientist, you could study that, right? You can put
Yeah,
sensors on someone's head and sense what kind of brain waves are coming out of that,
yeah,
right? And study people who maybe claim to have been through things like I have been through, and begin studying those types of things, brain waves in people like this, and what do those look like?
yeah.
And what do those look like throughout the day?
And these
You
are all
know?
brainwaves that all of us can achieve under without much effort. I mean, you've got
Yeah,
delta. Delta, I think, is associated with sleep. Then there's alpha. I think alpha, theta, theta, alpha, beta, gamma, something like. I think those are basically the
right.
five or six different brainwaves um,
Yeah.
that our minds enter into.
Yeah, because I mean, personally, I would be curious, to see what kind of brain waves am I putting out when I am able to just sit and think of nothing, and
Yeah,
to do that throughout the day. What do my brain waves look like? Are those alpha? Are those theta? What are those? I don't even know, you know what I
yeah.
mean? It
I
would
would love to know, right?
Right, but
We've gotta get
but
you an EEG.
yeah, right. But, that's just one of those place areas where science needs to pick up the
Yeah.
ball and start
I would
moving.
bet it's either alpha or theta, I would think.
Yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't know, but but I did recognize in reading these books, by William Walker Atkinson, that that is in fact an altered state of consciousness,
yeah,
which most people will be in that phase of like kind of zoning out and not really thinking of anything without thinking of that as an altered state of consciousness, right? It's just something that doesn't occur to most people throughout the day, but maybe if you did and you recognized it as that, you could then say to yourself, okay, well, that's an altered state of consciousness, and that's what that feels like psychologically. So let me try and stay in that and see what happens, you know? And I don't know. I think things like that would really pan out for people in terms of exploring their own consciousness. But obviously, you need to be aware of these things, and not just dismiss them or think that they're nothing, you know?
definitely. And understand practically how to tap into them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I guess I think you said this in your book maybe, or maybe you said it in an interview, but you compared, the end of initiation as landing on the shore of a new land or new world.
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know how to answer about, I don't know how to talk about all of it. I just got here. And
Right.
I'm wondering, 7 years on now, how, um, how has your perspective evolved?
Um, so this is a it really is like arriving on a new continent, right? I'm still on the beach, even 7 years later. But that's to be expected. I mean, to be able to, map this out. and be able to describe all of the different types of life and fauna that exists here and the ins and outs and intricacies of consciousness, I think is something that humans are going to be doing for the next several hundred years. I and I think I'm just a babe in the woods, really. I mean, I understand. I kind of understand what is uh what what the kind of capabilities are. How do you use those? I don't know. And what kinds of altered states will result in what in terms of consciousness, I don't know. But I know that there are definite things that I do know, right? Like, and I talk about it in the book. I know that when I'm in this state between awake and asleep, I sometimes will hear this female voice, right, that will tell me things. It may give me the name of an author to read, or whatever, or it'll tell me something, right?
Right.
And and so that's a thing, right? I know that's a thing. Um I've
It's kind of
had
one of the primary ongoing experiences that you have is being given information through your dreams.
Yeah. I would say that that's kind of a primary thing.
Yeah.
And that I learn a lot from dreams. In fact, the only reason I know about Dr. Robert Moore, and I've talked about this in other interviews, is that I just after my initiation finished, I started to have this dream, or these series of dreams, where there was this elderly gentleman sitting across from me. And in my dream, he's teaching me about human psychology. And I'm asking him questions, he's answering them. He was this older gentleman with a beard, a deep voice. I didn't know who he was. And then I'm waking up from one of these dreams and I hear the female voice for the first time. And it says, Robert Moore.
Yeah.
And it keeps repeating that name as I'm waking up. And so I wrote it down. And then when I looked him up, I saw that Robert Moore is this guy who wrote all these books that seem to be in line with what I'm what I'm talking about. And so I'm reading one of his books, and I put it down one day, and I go to the restroom, come back, and I had put the book down on its face, and on the back there was a picture of him. And I was like, "Oh my God, that's the guy from my dream,"
Yeah.
you know? Uh And so then it was like, oh, well, that's why this voice told me Robert Moore, because that's who I was just talking to in my dream. And so that kind of thing happens as well. I've had continued experiences with deceased relatives, even that have come to me in dreams and told me things. So yeah, I mean, all of that stuff is real, and I don't doubt it for 1 second, because you can have a relative or some deceased person in a dream tell you something that you don't know about, or that you don't know exists, and then some concept of something maybe, and then you wake up and you Google that thing, and oh, there it is. That is a real thing
Yeah.
that my mother just told me about in a dream. you know, and it's like that is I me prior to this, if you had come to me prior to these experiences, prior to being on the Theodore Roosevelt, and said, "You're gonna write a book about this and you're gonna be talking about these things in the future," I would be like, "You are batshit crazy."
Yeah.
There is no, I do not believe in those things. There's no way. But of course, when you experience them, there's no doubt, right? There's no doubt in my mind that these things are real. Of course they are. And I'm not the only one that experiences them. We're all human. We all experience these things.
What you
So
know
let's
how
talk
Chris
about it.
Bledsoe has his painting of the lady?
Yeah.
I think we really need a painting of your Teletubby beans badly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if I were any kind of a good artist and I could draw anything other than a stick figure, I
Yeah.
would do it. in a
I think
heartbeat.
we've got to get you on ChatGPT, or we've got to get you an artist or something. I need that.
Right, right.
Yeah. And I guess, yeah, I think I've heard you mention this, but you don't really practice any specific protocols today, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I mean,
like no
the only
meditation.
I would say the only protocols that I practice are just to try and remain kind of, I don't know, true to the base kind of teachings
Yeah.
about this stuff.
So kind of
Uh,
constant self-reflection.
yeah, because that's what I've always done, and that's what's always worked for me and kind of led me to this. So I'm going to continue to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to continue to work on myself and to try and always strive for a kind of perfection, right? Which is what we should all do, to be
Absolutely.
perfect.
Yeah. To be more perfect, a more perfect union.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. Matthew, this has been a pleasure, and I look forward to hopefully doing it again.
Yeah, it was great conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank
I
you.
really
Thank you so much.
appreciate it.
And thank you
Okay,
for
thank you.
being the first guest.
Thank you for making me the first guest. I'm
Awesome.
flattered. Thank
Yeah.
you
Didn't want it to
very
be anyone
much.
else. All right. Cheers.
Thanks. Thanks.